Within a dark, stone-hewn dungeon, three skeletons stand guard in an arched corridor, their bony forms still and silent. Suddenly alert, one of the skeletons points deeper into the passage, announcing that this is the designated location for the dungeon's grand unveiling ceremony. An intelligent skeleton named Reinal, his eye sockets glowing with a faint light, expresses doubt to his comrades. He questions the wisdom of opening a dungeon in such a remote and desolate place, while the cloaked dungeon master observes silently from a dais in the background. Elsewhere, a young man named Kumin grins with excitement at the prospect. He envisions adventurers arriving, being defeated, and their loot being claimed. His enthusiasm is infectious, though a flicker of doubt crosses his mind as he wonders if their plan will truly succeed so easily. A hooded figure turns and gives a sharp order to his skeletal minions, telling them to disperse. With that done, he turns his thoughts to the monitoring room, contemplating his next move. The hooded man is, in fact, a dungeon master. He recalls that in a previous life, he was an ordinary person from Japan. With only vague memories of his past and little knowledge of this new world, he is focused solely on expanding his own dungeon across the mountainous landscape. He stands on a ridge, his skeletal followers behind him. He notes that the horse-drawn carriage he spotted earlier was 500 meters away, but now, for individuals stand at a distance of 400 meters. The narrative shifts back to Kumin, who reflects on his own difficult past. He had to awaken his dungeon magic alone in a cave. With nothing to eat, he was forced to master a skill called empty stomach immunity just to survive. Now, he is only 300 meters away from his own dungeon's public opening. The hooded dungeon master looks out over the terrain with grim satisfaction. It has been a long journey, but with only 200 meters remaining, his dungeon has finally expanded enough to pierce completely through the massive mountain. He clenches his fist, reflecting on his decision to expend extra magic to summon Reinal, his only subordinate capable of conversation. While the inability of the other skeletons to communicate is a known factor, he is grateful for Reinal's presence. His expression hardens. The time for preparation is over. He suddenly whirls around, shouting for Kumin to stop eating the provisions meant for other people. The outburst startles the small dungeon master, who asks what he said, confused as to why they hadn't heard anything. Ignoring the confusion, he thrusts his hand forward, issuing a command to his skeletal minions. A nearby Kumin sighs in exasperation. All right, the hooded figure declares, it's time to go. At his word, a massive section of the mountainside erupts in a deafening explosion of rock and dust, revealing a dark, cavernous opening. The army of skeletons stands poised at the new entrance. With the entrance cleared, he urgently directs his forces, ordering them to take up their ambush positions within the dungeon. This rapid deployment is possible through the use of ambush, a form of maze magic that allows one to submerge into the labyrinth's walls. While the dungeon is filled with dummy passages to mislead intruders, this skill provides a shortcut to the true stronghold deep within. Now inside his monitoring room, he asks for a status report on the approaching carriage, only to realize with a sweat drop that he left Reinal, his only means of communication, outside. The other skeletons simply sit and chatter their teeth, offering no useful information. Meanwhile, the carriage has come to an abrupt halt. A party of 4 adventurers, a swordsman with spiky hair, a woman with a dark ponytail, a small mage, and an elf child, stare ahead. The swordsman voices their shared confusion, wondering what this sudden rock formation is. The woman with the ponytail notices a fissure in the rock face, questioning if it might be an entrance. Nearby, another female adventurer with spiky blonde hair stands by their horse, also observing the strange sight. From a hidden vantage point, the hooded dungeon master watches them, sweating with relief. He realizes how close he came to being discovered. As the woman asks the swordsman what's wrong, he dismisses his unease as just his imagination. He watched from his monitoring room, a wide grin spreading across his face as the adventurers appeared on his screen. From the dungeon master's viewpoint, he could see them clearly, exclaiming with delight that they had finally arrived. The party of 5 stood at the entrance, taking in the rough-hewn stone walls. The man with spiky hair remarked that it felt less like a cave and more like a proper dungeon. The woman with the ponytail wondered aloud if it was a new type, as she'd never heard of a dungeon in this area before. The small mage in the pointed hat suggested they investigate, pointing out that some adventurers had already dirted the walls and ceiling with mud. They mused that someone had clearly tried hard to create a dungeon-like atmosphere. The young elf beside them looked on, unimpressed by the lack of anything substantial to see. Beyond the entrance lay the first area he had prepared, a wide, circular chamber. Within it, 15 skeletons lay dormant inside coffins that lined the walls, each equipped with a manufactured stone sword and shield, waiting for the intruders. His eyes were glued to the monitor, watching the adventurers' markers inch closer. They're coming just a little more, he thought, trembling with anticipation. Beside him, the dungeon master watched as the protagonist suddenly declared he couldn't just let his boss go on ahead. Meanwhile, Reinal and the other skeletons were already on the move. Reinal impatiently asked what was taking their master so long. Another skeleton confirmed that their master had dashed off and even used a bit of magic. The protagonist, listening in, grew visibly annoyed. He confronted Reinal directly, furious that they had entered so quickly. He yelled that their haste would ruin his carefully designed path, and make things more complicated. Reinl calmly countered that he knew the way and saw no need for caution, adding that it would only take a newcomer an hour to reach this point anyway. His explanation did little to soothe the protagonist, who exploded in frustration, calling Reinl an idiot. In the background, the dungeon master and another skeleton chuckled, amused by the outburst. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. It wasn't the adventurer's fault. He just wished his own creations would be quiet for a moment. The result of their premature charge was clear. The first chamber was a wreck, with open coffins and scattered bones. The skeletons had been completely wiped out. Standing in the doorway, the dungeon master surveyed the scene as a single thought echoed in the empty room. Go home. The sound of crumbling stone fades, leaving only an empty corridor. After the adventurer's swift passage, nothing remains of the skeletal guards. He turns his frustration on the reassembling skeleton, Reinl. He demands to know what Reinl meant by saying things when as expected, lamenting that he should have been told the skeletons were so weak. His anger gives way to despair. Because of this failure, his simple plan to scare the adventurers and take their food has been sacrificed for nothing. Reinl, now fully restored, questions why his boss is on the verge of tears. He calmly states that while the thought of being killed is irritating, it's of little consequence since they are already dead. He continues, explaining that while their power has its limits, it's nothing to worry about. If their master simply infuses them with magic every day, they will grow stronger. Taking the advice, he extends a hand, and a faint light emanates towards the other skeletal remains. He realizes that simply sending them his magic is enough to restore them. With his minions reassembled, the dungeon master announces that the boss has something to say. The young man sweats nervously, telling the skeletons he'll try to do a little better next time, leaving them tilting their heads in confusion. The next day, he stands before a solid rock wall deep within the dungeon, contemplating the empty space. His focus narrows on the wall as he prepares to enact his next idea, expansion. He shouts the command, "Space reload," and the wall violently bursts outward. He stumbles back, startled by the dangerous force of his own creation. He considered his next steps, realizing he could use space reload to clear out obstructions and then ground leveling to expand his maze. He mused that this was the lower limit. If he dug any deeper, he might hit groundwater. With a decision made, he invoked ground leveling. The earth beneath his feet immediately hardened and flattened across a set area. Again and again, he cast the spell, each use costing a single point of magic as he rapidly carved a new corridor through the earth. As he worked, he reflected on his recent failure. The dungeon's public opening had been a bust because he hadn't achieved his main goal of meeting people. He now understood that he had been too focused on defending himself, failing to consider the perspective of those he was trying to attract. He resolved to think things through more carefully. It had been a long time since he'd spoken with another person, and he found himself wondering aloud what Kyo-chan would think of his plans. He then corrected his own thoughts, reminding himself that he wasn't just any dungeon master, but an intermediate dungeon master. He wondered if this was all some kind of test of his spirit. His mind drifted back to the moment he first awoke in this world. From the very beginning, a female voice had spoken directly into his mind. This voice, belonging to the one he now called Kyo-chan, was the one who taught him how to use dungeon magic. The voice explained the magic consumption, setting the cost of creating a 1 cubic meter space at 1 MP. He was impressed, realizing Kyo-chan had even adapted to Japanese conventions for his sake. He then acknowledged that while he'd started calling the voice Kyo-chan without much thought, it felt undeniably right. Elsewhere, the dungeon master mused on the nature of fate. He explained to Reinl, who had just approached, that Kyo-chan is not a function influenced by chance, but one intrinsically tied to the dungeon master. Reinl simply asked what his boss was doing in this location. Suddenly, the entire wall beside him exploded into dust and rubble. The dungeon master stared in shock, realizing the protagonist had just used his power right there, lamenting that he'd failed the dungeon opening for nothing. The hooded young man gestures toward the newly formed passage, addressing the skeleton beside him. He decides that for now, they should turn back. As he walks away, he takes a moment to mentally categorize the magic at his disposal. He realizes it falls into 3 main types: magic for maintaining the dungeon itself, magic for creating weapons and traps, and spells he can cast on himself for movement or other enhancements. His status confirms his rank as an intermediate dungeon master with 118,000 MP. From a distance, the dungeon master watches him go. His thoughts then turn to summoning magic. He considers that besides skeletons, he could probably summon goblins. However, he immediately dismisses the idea, reasoning that they would starve without a food source. He has no desire to use any living creature as a disposable pawn. Suddenly, a loud clattering interrupts his contemplation. The skeleton, Reinl, begins rattling and shouting excitedly before activating a skill, fast move, and dashing away in a blur of motion. The other skeletons are left behind, rattling in apparent confusion. The remaining undead minions look around, their empty sockets conveying bewilderment. They seem to question where their boss has suddenly gone. Meanwhile, the protagonist has found a quiet spot at the mouth of a cave, overlooking the forest. He sits down, pondering what his next move should be. He settles into a comfortable position, relieved. He can finally focus and think clearly. It has been 5 days since his arrival, and this is the first moment of peace he has had to himself. He muses that this kind of magic is perfect for a loner. His mind drifts back to 6 months prior, when he first awoke in this place. He remembers looking up at the skeletal remains of a person. The white bones of the deceased didn't react to his corpse absorption ability, so he had only been able to take the rope they possessed. This memory connects to his understanding of the dungeon's nature. He visualizes how a dungeon, when connected to a deeper one through a ventilation shaft, becomes recognized as part of that larger whole. From its own vantage point, the dungeon master watches the distant figure and reflects on his progress. It recalls that the boy started with only 10 MP, but steadily increased his limit daily until he evolved into an intermediate dungeon master with over 500,000 MP. The dungeon master concludes that the boy is getting carried away, and that his only real talent is being good at running away. The scene shifts abruptly as the protagonist is sent tumbling across the rough ground by an unseen force. He lets out a sharp grunt of surprise as he hits the dirt, his dark robe billowing around him. The impact sends a small, disc-like object skittering away from him, spinning and whirring across the dusty floor. He lands hard on his hands and knees, groaning in pain. A stark realization surfaces in his mind. As a dungeon master, he is incapable of leaving his dungeon. Pushing himself into a sitting position, he rubs the back of his head, acknowledging to himself that he already knew that. He begins to ponder what he, as a dungeon master, should even do in this world. There was, after all, a purpose behind his reckless decision to open his dungeon to the public. His motivations were simple, even mundane. He wanted to eat the food of this world and talk to its people. He even imagined getting close to a cute girl, picturing himself smiling with a young woman with short hair, thinking that would be nice. He reflects on his failure. His dungeon is both his greatest feature and his most powerful weapon. He concludes that if the public opening failed, then he simply needs to create a better dungeon for the next attempt. His expression hardens with focus. He realizes the process is identical to developing an app or a web service. It's about achieving product-market fit, iterating on the product over and over until it's finally accepted by the users. With this new framework, he decides to set aside his personal desires and think about the user. He begins to construct a model, a hot-blooded adventurer, around 20 years old. He considers that while you can't coddle the user, you can't frustrate them either. He thinks of someone who would use a macro to click a button 1,000 times a second, deciding that is not his target audience. He refines the persona further. This adventurer isn't a lone wolf. He has a party, companions he would risk his life to protect. His pleasure comes from buying a drink for a girl in a town he visits. This is the kind of person he's building for, not some envious brute. Now, he will dig deeper into the details. He needs to think about the user story, what kind of experience this adventurer would have in the dungeon, and what they would need to accomplish to feel successful. The entire dungeon will be built around this narrative. He continued to refine his thoughts, concluding that he must provide an experience for his users and continuously update it for improvement. Just as one would observe visitors to make modifications, he could do the same for his dungeon. With his magic, he could use it to its limits and simply recover by sleeping. A faint sound pricked his ear, momentarily drawing his attention. The line of thinking dredged up unfamiliar terms. He tried to grasp the meaning of apps and web services, concept that felt like echoes from his past life. He decided to let it go for now, confident the full memory would eventually surface. Suddenly, the answer became clear. He spoke aloud, a spark of excitement in his voice, declaring that the path forward was to improve the dungeon's UX, the user experience. He was certain this was the strategy he needed to pursue. He stopped abruptly, a puzzled look on his face as he realized he was talking to himself. To better frame the concept, he compared it to more familiar ideas. A good experience wasn't just about the core product, but also about the atmosphere, the speed of service, and the quality, much like in a restaurant. Across the table, the dungeon master sat listening intently. Seated in the snow, the cloaked young man observes the girl before him, remarking that she is interesting. She tilts her head, a curious glint in her eyes, and asks him to elaborate. Her simple question sends his mind reeling. He is utterly captivated, internally declaring her a goddess, overwhelmed by how cute her voice and appearance are. As he struggles to compose himself, she asks where they are and what lies ahead. As they begin to walk through the desolate, cavernous space, she casually brings up the topic of their next meal. The suggestion throws him into a silent panic, his mind screaming that this is an emergency evacuation and that thinking about such things is impossible. The wind whispers across the vast, empty expanse. She pauses, a flicker of confusion crossing her face as she surveys their bleak surroundings. He is completely overwhelmed, his mind racing. He wonders why the girls in this world are so adorable and laments his inability to hold a simple conversation. He berates himself, thinking he should have just eaten her instead, and tries to use his emergency evacuation skill to calm his nerves. His internal criticism continues as he stands apart, agonizing over how creepy he must have seemed and wishing he could have discussed something else. Noticing his distress, the girl turns to him and asks if he is all right. Before he can answer, she begins to remove her travel-worn top, her movements fluid and unconcerned. She deftly ties the front of a fresh, clean garment, securing it around her torso. Stepping away briefly, she turns back with a small, satisfied sigh, now clad in her new attire. For 30 seconds that stretched into an eternity, he stood frozen. All other thoughts vanished, leaving him purely and simply moved by her profound beauty. He snaps out of his daze, shouting for the girl to wait as he questions if this is some kind of elaborate trap. As he speaks, the elf girl, whom he calls Fujiin, trips with a loud thud and falls flat on her face. Cursing, he turns and flees into the darkness, his mind racing with a single, critical fact. The dungeon master cannot leave the maze. From a nearby opening, the dungeon master's voice echoes, observing that it has been roughly 200 days since the hooded youth arrived. The young man reflects on this. He has grown accustomed to this world, a place where he has neither eaten nor spoken to another soul. The reason for this isolation becomes clear. The dungeon master has been busy, amassing a formidable army of skeletons with Reinald's assistance. The cost is staggering, 500,000 magic points per day to maintain the 500 undead soldiers. A wave of doubt washes over the small creature, wondering if concentrating them all in one location was a foolish move. Despite their numbers, each skeleton retains a spark of individuality, a lingering echo of a life they once lived as part of another race. As one is carefully reassembled, the dungeon master resolves not to repeat the failures of the past. The small master turns its attention to its lieutenant, Reinald, posing a question that has been lingering. It asks how the skeleton is able to understand its speech, noting that the ease of their communication felt almost too convenient, like an effect of maze magic. Reinald seems taken aback by the timing of the query. This thought triggers a memory of the pure-hearted girl, the goddess-like being he had been able to converse with so easily. He realizes now that maze magic could not have been the reason for their connection. He voices this new understanding to the dungeon master, suggesting the magic woven into its tattered robe is the key. He posits that it must be a form of telepathy, a power that allows communication to transcend the very barrier of language itself. The dungeon master deflects the observation, denying that its own magical reserves are responsible for such a feat. Changing the subject, it turns to its skeletal minions and asks how many of them a normal person could even hope to summon and maintain. Reinald provides the answer. A typical necromancer would expend nearly all their life force just to summon a single undead servant. The hooded youth, seated on the ground, expresses his shock at this revelation. He eagerly gestured towards the dungeon master, asking what grand plan he had in mind. Beside him, Reinald explained to the protagonist that the dungeon master's magic points weren't a static 10,000. They actually increased with the number of living things in the maze. The skeleton asked if he now understood the boss's unusual nature, given the 500 skeletons. The protagonist confirmed he did, though he mused that he could handle 4 times that number. The purpose for this immense power was, of course, for the Dungeon UX Improvement Project. This project sparked a realization for the protagonist. He recalled that his first major discovery while reviewing the dungeon's magic was the manufacturing refinery. With the addition of intermediate forming, it became possible to shape metal and even infuse materials with heat and magic. Using this manufacturing refinery, his first step was to begin the mass production of traps throughout the dungeon. Sometime later, he telepathically apologized to someone named Keo-chan, explaining that his magic was draining because he was using it to maintain their conversation. The dungeon master dismissed his concern as a normal occurrence, while Reinald asked if this was related to the glacial period and the matter of the 500 skeletons. Reinald then correctly deduced that the protagonist was the one who had set up all the traps in the dungeon, remarking on how elaborate the mechanisms were. He confirmed it with a weary expression, stating the precise number of traps he had installed, 12,000. The dungeon master affirmed that the goal was, of course, to welcome adventurers. The protagonist reacted with disbelief, asking if the master hadn't given up on that idea. He clenched his fist, declaring that he absolutely could not accept interacting with outsiders. His internal desires, however, told a different story. He wanted friends, to eat with others, visit a bathhouse, and see the town. Reinald's desire, in stark contrast, was simply to beat up a woman. The protagonist yelled that their wishes were just a little bit different. As Reinald tried to calm him down, suggesting he be more honest with himself, the flustered protagonist snapped back, telling the skeleton not to pat his shoulder. He grits his teeth, internally declaring that he already has a goddess in his heart. This thought is a direct reaction to the peacefully sleeping elf girl, whose serene expression he finds almost divine after she was invited for a single nap. This conviction solidifies his unusual approach. He muses that while summoning powerful monsters is the typical way to defend a dungeon, he is concerned that people might die. He feels he must provide a different kind of experience, something he hasn't been able to properly articulate until now. Therefore, he has decided to focus primarily on traps. He realizes they can be imbued with teleportation magic, allowing adventurers to be safely ejected from a dungeon. He recalls that the goddess's cave lacked high-speed movement, but within his own domain, he can enable such travel to any point for a cost of 100,000 magic points. He attempts to convey this to the dungeon master, who simply asks about the dungeon's opening date. The protagonist sighs, concluding that any explanation would be futile. They would only hear that he isn't summoning monsters and has instead built an absurd number of traps, so he gives up on explaining. With his decision made, he proceeds to the dungeon command room. There, he addresses the assembled undead, requesting that 10 squad leader skeletons be brought before him. He then explains the new system to Reinald. The command room is located in the very center of the mountain that houses the public dungeon. From this hub, a comprehensive map displays the locations of all traps and any intruders. and every room is equipped with a magical jump trap for swift movement. Monitors in the room display critical data, including trap activation counts and damage reports. The system's cost is substantial: 350,000 magic points for creation and an additional 10,000 per hour for maintenance, a cost applied to every trap. Observing the setup, the dungeon master turns to Reinal, asking if he is truly content with this plan to open the dungeon to the public. Reinal clarifies that it isn't a matter of dissatisfaction. Rather, he is planning meticulously based on the lessons learned from their last failure. He then declares with conviction that this plan is the culmination of his master's ideas, calling it utterly unconventional. He turns his gaze, addressing his master directly. His praise, however, seems to fluster his master. The hooded figure leans forward, hands on the table, defensively exclaiming that of course it's a great plan. It's only natural for them. He gestured emphatically, his frustration palpable. He explained that he had poured an immense amount of passion into this dungeon, and he was dead serious about conveying that dedication to the users. He insisted that just waving them in wouldn't be enough. To that end, he sat with Reinal to discuss strategy. He wanted to open the dungeon to the public soon, questioning if there was a Memorial Day or some other event that might increase traffic. Reinal could only reply that even if he were told a specific date, he wouldn't know where it was. Giving up on a grand opening, he leaned back in his chair, propping his feet up on his skeletal minions. He decided to just open the dungeon whenever the next stagecoach happened to arrive. Reinal and the dungeon master watched his casual display. His nonchalance was shattered by a sudden alert. His expression sharpened as he focused on a map display. In one of the 5 newly installed monitoring rooms, a light had shifted from green to orange. He identified the orange alert as a warning and commanded Reinal to follow him. They arrived at monitoring room 1 to find a gaping hole in the ceiling. The skeletons already present stared up at the breach. He demanded to know what had happened. Peering up through the jagged opening, a wide, manic grin spread across his face. He roared with delight, shouting for the combatants above to get them. The view from below revealed a scene of brutal chaos. A group of bandits swarmed a cart, their leader bellowing for them to kill everyone and not to bother with resistance. As he noted, only one defender remained. Another bandit spotted the observer in the hole below, questioning who he was. A short time later, the conflict was over. The bandit leader lay defeated on the ground. Reinal noted with a hint of amusement that the bandits had won. The dungeon's master observed the fallen man, noting his equipment suggested he was a regular soldier and that he seemed to be carrying something. He processed the violent aftermath with a startling coldness. He wondered at his own composure, facing a scene where 5 soldiers had fallen to 20 bandits. In his previous life, he had been an ordinary person from Japan. This detachment was new. The reason for his state became clear. A fundamental rule of his existence asserted itself. A dungeon master becomes insensitive to the lives of creatures unrelated to their dungeon. With this understanding, a quiet realization dawned on him. He gazes down at the fallen soldier, confirming to Reinal that it appears to be a regular military man. He adds, however, that he has never seen that particular uniform before and is unsure of their location. Reinal finds the situation strange, noting that the wagon wasn't made of iron and questioning why bandits would bother attacking regular soldiers. He concludes that it must be a sign of a weak local lord, whose domain is ripe for being overrun. Meanwhile, one of the bandits speaks to his captive. He scoffs at the idea that his group acts without thinking, asserting that they had a very good reason to take such a significant risk. He then reveals his prize, a small, chained child. The bandit remarks on the child's unusual skin color before identifying them as a demon child, noting how rare and valuable such a captive is. From their hidden vantage point, Reinal explains that because the child is so close to human in form, it will fetch a high price and can even be sold into sex slavery. The thought visibly disturbs the dungeon master, but he hardens his expression, stating aloud that it being a child is irrelevant. His cold dismissal prompts a questioning boss from the confused skeleton. The dungeon master remains silent, wrestling with his thoughts. This world and its ethics are unknown to him. He has no framework for who to command his skeletons to save, nor does he know if concepts like human rights even exist here. Even so, the idea of helping a child pursued by bandits persists. Reinal asks if he is truly serious. The dungeon master confirms that he is. The skeleton points out the obvious danger. The bandits are human, the child is a demon, and attacking them could lead to his own death. Unfazed, he simply acknowledges the risk. As a final warning, Reinal mentions that such an action will impact their public plans. His master's response is curt. I know. Below, one of the bandits kicks the small demon child to the ground. The dungeon master's earlier realization echoes in his mind, that as the master of this place, he should not be moved by the life or death of those unrelated to his dungeon. He stood firm, his fists clenched as he reflected on his personal policy, one he considered rather pathetic, to not liven up his dungeon to the point of actually hurting people. With that principle in mind, he sprang into action, declaring a new addition to his code. If a child is in trouble, they must be helped regardless of their race. He then shouted his command, Reinal, move out now. From below, the skeleton's glowing eyes signaled its immediate compliance. Under a sky filled with glowing motes, the hooded young man clasps his hands, his face slick with nervous sweat. He worries that if he is called upon again, he will be completely exposed. His anxiety is interrupted by an animated skeleton, Reinal, who cheerfully announces that this is the 6th time they've met and introduces himself as an intelligent skeleton. Reinald's enthusiastic explanation that he's a great person to have on one's side only flusters the young man, who complains that the skeleton talks too much. The dungeon master observes the exchange from distance. He snaps, declaring that he's tired of hearing it, and warns Reinald that if he speaks again in the next 3 minutes, he will summon more skeletons to advance on him. With a huff, he challenges the skeleton, asking what he'll do if the numbers increase. His anger suddenly evaporates, replaced by desperation. He clings to Reinald, tearfully begging not to be ignored, admitting that he understands how painful it is to be lonely. While being held, Reinald's thoughts drift. He wonders what he did in his past life to be summoned so easily, musing that perhaps by holding a spear, he might slowly remember being a warrior. The young man's focus sharpens, his expression hardening with resolve. He issues a clear command. The skeletons are to pursue the bandits at all costs and rescue the child. This order gives Reinald pause. Standing at the mouth of a cave, he questions if his master is serious, reminding him that as a former human, he should still possess a human heart. The young man confirms that he is, indeed, serious. He elaborates on his concern, stating that the bandits are human, whereas the child is a demon. He asks why his master would help a demon if it meant harming humans. The young man dismisses the question, retorting, "So what?" and questioning why he should be expected to understand such distinctions. His thoughts drift inward, reflecting on his tendency to avoid showing his true feelings and getting too involved with others. He had always believed he was the type of person who kept a safe distance. Casting that hesitation aside, he extends his hand with authority. He declares that their difference in race is no reason to abandon a child and commands Reinald to move immediately. At that moment, Reinald recognizes that his master's sense of justice is the same as his own. He sat in contemplation, wondering if his unresolved feelings from past life had anything to do with his concern for the child. His thoughts were cut short as Reinald formally acknowledged the order, raising a horn to its skeletal jaw. The skeleton let out a sharp blast, and immediately, a unit of skeletal crossbowmen appeared, weapons raised and ready. The hooded youth watched, completely startled. He had been entirely unaware that Reinald had been conducting military drills with the other undead. From the dungeon's darkness, the dungeon master's voice echoed with commands for the 8th and 9th Archer squads and the 2nd and 8th Infantry squads to prepare. As rows of skeletons armed with swords and shields assembled, the order was given to open the firing ports. At the command, the skeletal archers took aim. The dungeon master gave the final order to fire, and a volley of arrows rained down upon the completely unsuspecting bandits below. The hooded youth could only watch, bewildered by the sudden, organized assault. The volley threw the bandits into a panic. Cries of confusion erupted as they scrambled, shouting about the unexpected attack. One of the men cursed the darkness, unable to locate their assailants, while the protagonist stared with wide-eyed shock. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from another direction. What was that? One of the bandits yelled out in alarm. The source of the noise was revealed. The 2nd Infantry unit was charging forward, a wave of bone and steel. They crashed into the bandit lines with unnatural force, and the men screamed in terror as the undead warriors began their relentless assault. Observing from a concealed position, the hooded youth was taken aback. He realized the weapons his skeletons wielded were far more effective than he'd anticipated, crafted from the simple materials he had provided. Down in the fray, the bandits were being overwhelmed. The muscular bandit roared at his comrades, ordering them to ignore the skeletons and secure their prize. From his vantage point, the hooded figure watched the chaos unfold. As one of his skeletons prepared to order a second volley, he cried out, telling Reinald to wait, warning that if they kept shooting, they would hit their own forces. Reinald calmly replied that of course the arrows would hit them. His master was aghast at this response, questioning how the skeleton could be so nonchalant. He insisted it was wrong to kill their own allies. The skeleton pointed out that it was of no consequence, as his boss could simply revive them with an infusion of magic. This explanation gave the young man pause, as he suddenly considered the possibility of running out of magical energy. He became flustered, realizing he had been so caught up in the fight that he'd forgotten his own limits, feeling deeply embarrassed. Seeing his master's distraction, Reinald seized the moment, his eye sockets glinting as he bellowed the order for the second volley. The command was carried out instantly. Down in the clearing, the bandits broke into a full rout, screaming in terror as the skeletal soldiers advanced without pause. Their leader, seeing the battle was lost, desperately yelled for his men to retreat. As the sounds of battle faded, Reinald turned his attention back to his master, asking if they should pursue the survivors. He noted that even though it was night, they could still track them effectively. He considered the question, his expression weary. He told Reinald not to pursue, but to capture any who remained. He reasoned that the bandits were not the type to risk their own lives for their fallen comrades, making a chase unnecessary. He elaborated on his strategy, explaining that if a regular soldier were found injured, it would cause a major incident. The bandits, however, would direct their anger solely at the dungeon. Spotting the wounded bandit leader on the ground, he declared that his real plan was just beginning. With a sudden burst of enthusiasm, he threw his arms wide, announcing his grand scheme. He would open the dungeon to the public precisely when it was drawing the most attention. He proudly asked for Reinald's opinion, boasting about his own cleverness. The skeleton simply stared back, hand to its chin, and asked if his master was perhaps overlooking something. His triumphant mood deflated instantly as he realized a critical oversight. He had no rope to bind the prisoners. A fundamental rule of his power came to mind, a memo from the dungeon master, confirming that dungeon magic could not create organic materials like grass or food, and by extension, rope. He peers out from the dungeon's maw, recalling the grim choice he had to make. To save the child, he had to order the slaughter of the mountain bandits. He had commanded Reinald to eliminate them all, a decision that weighs on him. This action leaves him with a faint feeling of having broken a taboo, though it's less pronounced than he anticipated. He questions whether this emotional distance is a mental effect of his role as dungeon master, or if the reality of his command simply hasn't sunk in. Ultimately, he sets the thought aside, concluding that if his heart is at peace, then that is all that matters. Meanwhile, the regular soldiers have taken custody of the captured bandits. His attention then turns to the immediate concern. He and Reinald stand over the small demon child, who is now sleeping soundly on a mat. For now, he decides this child is the priority. The hooded youth, with the small dungeon master perched on his shoulder, turns to Reinald. He asks if the boy is following them, and then questions the meaning of Onii-chan. Before the skeleton can respond, the youth dismisses it as nothing. Reinald, however, offers a different observation, stating that the child looks like a demon boy. The hooded youth turns back, surprised, and repeats the word demon as a question. They now stand before the child, who lies weakly on a stone slab. Reinald confirms his earlier statement, explaining that demons are a race included among the demonkin. He elaborates that while their biology is close to human, they're a race fundamentally hostile to them. The child lets out a faint sigh, observing the child, now secured behind bars. Reinald notes that while he is unconscious, his condition is not life-threatening. He speculates that the boy has likely not been given proper meals. The hooded youth's expression darkens at this thought. He internally concludes that anyone who would harm a small, defenseless child is scum. Reinald's tone becomes sharp, addressing the youth as boss. He says he understands, but warns him that if he says anything more, he will be sent to hell. The dungeon master questions Reinald's life or death command. With a sharp turn of his skull, Reinald retorts that he is already dead, so it doesn't matter. He then puts a skeletal finger to his jaw, musing that he must have been some kind of warrior. As the hooded youth looks on skeptically, Reinald wonders aloud if he ever mentioned having no memory of his past life when he was summoned. Reinald explains to the dungeon master that he's just now starting to understand the concept of training his very bones. He admits, however, that he doesn't know what lies within this dungeon. The dungeon master replies that he will provide a course of training. The youth is completely flustered as Reinald strikes a bizarre pose. He asks if this is some kind of bone joke and questions his own awareness as a boss. Reinald simply asks if he has picked up the demon child yet. His dungeon master dismissed the idea of a public plan, stating that what had just begun was not what the boss had intended. It advised him to simply send the child back. As they spoke, the demon child, lying on a nearby bed, stirred with a faint sound. The sound immediately drew the attention of the skeletons. Reinald turned its head sharply, announcing that the child had awakened. The protagonist looked over, his expression unreadable beneath his hood. Sitting up, the child looked around the dark room in a daze, asking where they were. The protagonist explained that it was too dark to see, then lifted a glowing lantern, its light spilling into the space. The light revealed a menacing scene. The protagonist, flanked by his skeletal minions, grinned down at the child. He commented on what a disaster it had been for them, then ominously welcomed them to his dungeon. His menacing posture immediately crumbled into flustered self-awareness. He suddenly questioned why he was surrounded by bones, wearing a thin robe, and accompanied by countless more skeletons. He came to a stark realization. No matter how one looked at it, the entire situation was pure horror. However, the demon child was not frightened. They sat up, pointing an accusatory finger. "Who are you people?" they demanded, warning that they had better not try anything. As the skeletons backed away to maintain a social distance, the protagonist simply increased the light. The dungeon master flew beside him, frantically explaining that the child's father was an incredibly scary demon. The protagonist waved off the concern, calmly stating that while gaining their trust might be difficult, he wasn't worried. He watched as the child continued to shout, insisting that he couldn't prove he was an enemy. Their defiant tirade was cut short as they suddenly looked down at their lap with a jolt of realization, having wet themselves. The child's face flushed with intense embarrassment. All their bravado vanished, replaced by a stammer as they stared down, utterly mortified by what had just happened. The child, flustered after their accident, shouts that the situation is no laughing matter and that they cannot trust the hooded young man. Sighing with exasperation, he turns away, assuring the child that he won't tell anyone and that they don't have to trust him. He then points at the child, stating plainly that he saved them and expects no thanks in return. Nearby, a skeleton, having been easily revived from its shattered state, looks on with some confusion, though it suffered no real harm. Adopting a calmer tone, he sits near the child and asks if they have a way to return home. He explains that while he would like to escort them, he cannot leave the mountains himself, and suggests that if they must travel, it would be safest to do so at night. The child looks at him, puzzled by his offer, and asks what he is. They question if he is human, revealing that they themselves are a demon. He glances back, calmly confirming that it seems to be the case. A look of incorrect realization dawns on the child's face. They declare with a grin that he must be a dangerous mad scientist conducting research in demon territory. The young man flatly denies the accusation, his face a mask of bewilderment. The child presses on, demanding to know why he isn't afraid of them. He calmly replies that he doesn't see much difference between demons and humans. He turns away, explaining that he isn't a human either, but a dungeon master. The child continues to talk to his back, warning him not to speak of this place to anyone and questioning if he's just going to ignore them. He stops and glances back, reiterating his promise not to tell anyone. He states plainly that he has no particular interest in the child and only saved them for his own satisfaction. The child, taken aback by his bluntness, can only wonder what kind of person he is. A moment of realization strikes the child. They blush slightly, wondering to themselves if his earlier sigh was actually a preparatory action for casting magic. Their train of thought is interrupted by the sight of food, bread, cheese, and apples. The child's eyes light up as they are told to eat, eagerly realizing they can have the provisions secured by the soldiers. The child devours the food with unrestrained glee, stuffing their cheeks. As they eat, the hooded figure watches, a pained expression on his face. He considers the problem of getting the child to a town, but reassures himself that it's fine. He has the ignore hunger skill. In the background, even the skeletons seem to wish they could partake in a meal. Their face brightens, and they hold up a piece of bread for the hooded figure to see. He asks if it's delicious, and the child responds with an enthusiastic nod. His intense stare, however, betrays his true feelings. The child, noticing his fixed gaze, asks why he isn't eating as well. Turning away slightly, the hooded figure dismisses their concern, claiming he is fine precisely because he is hungry. The child stares, perplexed by his nonsensical statement. Suddenly, a look of horror dawns on their face. They recoil, shouting that he must have eaten something strange to be talking like that, and that he needs to get away for whatever setting is affecting him. Under the night sky, the small demon child throws her arms up in triumph, cheering that she has eaten her fill and loves demonic food. Nearby, the hooded young man stares grimly at the now depleted provisions, realizing with a sigh that she consumed a third of their entire food supply. The child, now lying down with a full belly, asks if it's time to leave and tells him to take the remaining food. Her expression shifts to one of slight suspicion as she asks if he is trying to send her away. She trails off into silence. The young man looks down at her still form, calling out to her. From their own vantage point, the dungeon master remarks that it's probably for the best if the strange girl leaves this place. In her sleep, the child begins to murmur, a blush on her cheeks. She tells him not to be rude, insisting that she has a proper name. Milia. He processes her sleepy words, his expression thoughtful as he repeats the name to himself. Milia. His contemplation is shattered as skeleton Reinl appears directly behind him, startling him with a shout. Reinl points out that the name he just heard is a girl's name. In the background, two other skeletons comically mimic the young man's shocked posture. He whirls around, demanding to know why they are there. The dungeon master calmly explains that they are always by their boss's side. He clarifies that since their boss has no combat ability, they must be there to protect him, adding that while they aren't monsters, they are beings who sometimes harm people. Accepting the explanation, he turns back to the sleeping Milia and gently adjusts the straps of her tunic. He quietly wonders to himself if her name is really a boy's name after all. He stands and looks around the sparse room, scratching the back of his neck. He notes the lack of a bed for the child, but resolves that he can make something for her eventually. From a distance, the dungeon master and Reinl observe the scene unfold, wondering what will happen next. Their attention and the narrative shifts to the remaining bag of food, with the somber thought that once Milia wakes up, it will all be gone. He suggests to his boss that they could make the dungeon public to acquire food. The young man immediately objects, pointing out that he was just told the child was not a demon, so there's no reason to discriminate against her. He expresses his frustration, admitting he doesn't understand their way of thinking or how their society functions. Turning to Reinl, he asks if the skeleton understands, but receives only silence. Decisively, he declares that he will go out and get something himself. His gaze softens as he looks over at the peacefully sleeping demon child. He reflects internally that it might seem heartless, but this is an unreasonable burden for him. Having already committed to taking responsibility for her, he feels it would have been better to have just left her behind from the start. As he reaches a hand toward the child's head, Reinl suddenly shouts a warning, telling his boss not to touch her, exclaiming that it's dangerous. The young man freezes, startled by the skeleton's panicked outburst. His eyes widen in alarm as a realization dawns on him. The child must possess some kind of special power. He thinks of Reinl's warning. The shock sends him stumbling backward, losing his balance completely. A voice cries out his title as he falls, a stark reminder that crucial information should always be reported first. The scene abruptly shifts. It is the year 20XX in the Roppongi district of Tokyo. Under the city lights, a small truck is parked on the street. Within a nearby office building, an employee named Takawaka stretches back in his chair, exhausted. He mutters that there's been no contact and no calls. At a neighboring desk, a new employee, Shimada Ko, asks if he has confirmed with the client, informing him that they are not coming. She glances at the wall clock, noting the late hour. It's already time for the last train, she realizes with a sigh. Turning back to her colleague, she mentions that Ko-chan is different from someone named Omiya, and because of that, they might not make it in time. She expresses her amazement at their work, noting how incredible it is to be involved in such a big project right after graduating from vocational school. She mentions they're designing the official website for director Thomas Blue's Labyrinth, concluding that their parent company must be exceptionally skilled. Her voice trails off as she adds that she's not used to working through the night, and that Takaoka is there with her. A blush spreads across her face as she realizes what she's implied. Her quiet admission catches his attention. From across the room, Takaoka turns from his monitor and asks her to clarify what she just said. She panics, thinking to herself that he's like a small animal and that she's being targeted by the man in the office. As he watches with a deadpan expression, she waves her hands frantically, insisting it was nothing. He stands from his desk, calmly stating that he's not targeting her. He reminds her that he's only a year older, and since they're close in age, it's easier for them to talk. Changing the subject, he offers to go to the convenience store downstairs for dinner and asks if she wants anything. He explains that he'll go, since he can't answer phone calls anyway. Her mood instantly lifts. She cheerfully asks for the usual, a drink and a melon pan, and he hands her some cash. She realizes he has her preferences completely figured out. He tells her to use the change for snacks, teasingly calling her a child. With a happy blush, she retorts that she is not a child. Giggling to herself, she playfully calls herself a good child and tells the old man to wait for her, much to his mild exasperation. Pausing at the doorway, she turns back with a warm smile and thanks him. As the door closes behind her, Takaoka is left alone at his desk in the vast, quiet office. He watches as Shimada Keo bids him farewell for the evening. He offers a simple reply, his expression unreadable as she departs. With her departure, an immense silence falls over the sprawling, empty office, leaving him as the sole occupant among rows of darkened computer screens. He notes the quiet, his attention drifting to a television screen. A news report is underway, detailing a hostage situation. The anchor explains that the culprit is a known international terrorist, a fact that makes Takaoka grimly acknowledge the severity of the events unfolding. His gaze shifts from the screen to the city outside, the glittering lights of the buildings reminding him of a vast field of tombstones. The broadcast, now live, continues its report. The anchor details that the criminal is armed with a rocket launcher and has barricaded themselves inside a building. The word labyrinth catches his ear. He reflects on how society itself can feel like a complex maze, a trap designed to trip people up. The reporter's voice cuts through his thoughts, mentioning the rocket launcher again and something about dungeon members. Takaoka dismisses it, thinking it's fine as long as it doesn't involve him, but finds the use of the word dungeon peculiar. His musings are cut short by a sudden, brilliant flash of light from the direction of the capital's expressway. Startled, he turns towards the window, questioning what he just saw. The answer is immediate and terrifying. A rocket has been fired. It screams across the sky, clearing the expressway and hurtling directly towards his window. The scene erupts in a cataclysmic shatter. Amidst the chaos, the skeletons cry out in alarm for their boss. Emerging from the dust, the hooded young man clutches his head, a sharp gasp escaping his lips as one of the skeletons rushes to his side, asking if he is all right. He collapses to his knees, supported by Reinal. He mutters about a splitting headache, his face pale and strained. This, he thinks, is the worst possible outcome. Reinal looks on, its skeletal features conveying deep concern. Reinal's bony hand reaches for his. The skeleton explains that they were aware they would vanish if their boss perished, questioning why he hadn't mentioned this possibility. In a sudden shift, the young man stands and grabs Reinal's skull, shaking it gently. He retorts that he gets scolded by his boss plenty as it is. He then sighs, pulling his cloak tighter and expressing a strong desire for a bath. At his word, Reinal immediately dispatches 2 skeletons to fetch water, though it has to call after them to wait for a claw. As the skeletons scurry away, he pulls back his hood, revealing his face and hair completely, causing the remaining skeletons to recoil in shock. Later, while resting without his cloak, he finds himself the subject of a report. The skeletons brief the dungeon master, who stand with arms crossed, pondering just what to make of this child. His attention, however, is on the demon child, Milia. He gently touches her, explaining that her magic seems to have a malevolent quality. Merely making contact is enough to trigger some kind of activation. He then turns his thoughts to his undead companions, asking if they are truly all right, sustained as they are by his own magic. The question prompts a deeper reflection, as he wonders if memories from his previous life, a life in a place called Japan, are beginning to resurface. His memories coalesce into a vivid scene from his past life. He was Takaoka Yu, an employee at a production subsidiary of an advertising agency. His responsibilities were vast, covering project management, design, direction, progress management, and operations. In essence, he was a jack of all trades, often found working late at his desk. Back in the present, within the stone walls of the dungeon, one of his skeletons reports that there have been no unusual changes. Another skeleton acknowledges the update. Elsewhere, the adventurers who had captured the demon child recall the encounter. They confirm that Milia possessed some unknown power, but they were unable to determine its nature. One remarks that for a pre-awakened boss, the dungeon master was surprisingly formidable. Attempting to convey his fragmented memories, he describes to Reinal an exquisitely bright building, unlike anything he'd seen before. He clarifies that it wasn't a tower, but a skyscraper, with a transparent window larger than the dungeon's entire wall. He trails off, realizing such a thing couldn't possibly exist in this world, leaving Rionel looking on in confusion. The skeleton suddenly recoils, shouting and demanding to know how his master knows the name Keo-chan. He questions why they share a memory of that girl. Composing himself, he internally acknowledges the deep bond between master and servant, but still finds the shared knowledge profoundly unsettling. His subordinate's outburst leaves him completely dejected, and he slumps to the floor. The other skeletons note how depressed their master has become. Rionel, meanwhile, is still shaken, the voice of his former junior colleague echoing in his mind, finding the connection to his master unnerving. He approaches his master and places a bony hand on his shoulder, offering a clumsy attempt at reassurance. He tells him that, compared to the disgusting slimes they've fought, he isn't really that creepy. The comment only serves to fuel his irritation. He grits his teeth, his face contorted in a grimace as he seriously considers destroying the skeleton on the spot. 2 days later, the situation remains unchanged. The demon child, Milia, has not awoken since the incident. Concealed once more within his hood, he watches over her still form on a stone slab, flanked by his skeletal guards, pondering the nature of the demon race. He speaks to his minions, admitting that he doesn't fully understand the child's ability. He reflects that it was because of that power that his memories as Takaoka Yu were triggered and began to resurface. He found himself lost in a memory of his past life as Takaoka Yu, sitting at a table with colleagues. One man expressed his amazement that Takaoka worked for a company in Roppongi. Takaoka clarified that it was just a subsidiary, not the impressive parent company. Another colleague scoffed, boasting that he could achieve the same if he ever got serious. The memory left him with a sour feeling. He mused that his life hadn't been all that enjoyable, and perhaps it was better not to have remembered it all. He quietly addressed his boss, lost in thought. His subordinate's voice cut through his reverie. Rionel, looking towards the unconscious demon child on the stone slab, asked what they should do with her. The hooded man replied that for now, they had no choice but to let her sleep. The skeleton pressed the issue, asking what would happen after she woke up. He wondered if his master would allow her to stay if she expressed a desire to remain there. The hooded man remained silent, his expression unreadable. His master's silence seemed to agitate Rionel, who suddenly erupted. He demanded to know why his boss was being so accommodating to a demon child, even considering making her a skeleton subordinate. He shouted that he didn't want to hear any position talk from skeleton. He continued his tirade, questioning why his master was trying to take the moral high ground with the child. Rionel explained that he was only asking a serious question, pointing out the concerns of raising a child, such as providing food and teaching common sense. His lecture concluded, the hooded man finally responded with a weary sigh, muttering that it would probably be fine. The skeleton's demeanor shifted. He remarked that his boss was too soft, then paused as a thought struck him. He confessed that when he was struck by his master's memory flash, he saw a brief glimpse of something else, a memory that was not his own. As he spoke, a new vision flooded the hooded man's mind. The demon child, Milia, her mouth covered by a restraining muzzle, a thick, buckled collar around her neck. The vision solidified into a stark scene. Milia sat alone in a barren cell, bound in a straitjacket, a heavy ball and chain shackled to her leg. For days on end, her freedom had been stolen. The realization struck him. This was not his memory, but Milia's. He reflects on the demon child's traumatic past. If this dungeon is the only place she has known any semblance of peace, then perhaps it is best to allow her some freedom within its walls. Having made his decision, he turns to Rionel, who has been waiting patiently. The hooded youth gives his assent, and the skeleton acknowledges the command with a simple, understood. Just as the matter seems settled, Rionel calls out to him again. Looking weary from the mental ordeal, the young man turns back, asking what more there is to discuss. The skeleton gestures with an open palm, announcing that their expected visitors have finally arrived. Their gazes shift toward the mouth of the cave. Rionel confirms their arrival, and the hooded youth agrees, his voice low. He had been waiting for them. Outside, a horse-drawn carriage flanked by 2 soldiers in full-plate armor approaches the dungeon. This is the investigation team, marking the first step of a new, unfolding plan. Inside, the bustling Adventurers Guild, notices are pinned to a large board. Amidst the general clamor, one adventurer turns to another, asking if they've heard the latest rumor. The story unfolds. A carriage from the Eastern Territories was attacked by bandits. However, the shocking detail is that the assailants were skeletons. The aftermath was grim, with bodies found scattered about. The listener expresses their disbelief. Overhearing this, a cloaked man recalls hearing about bandits in that area, but the mention of skeletons is new to him. He turns to his bald, scarred companion, asking for a moment of his time. Their conversation attracts the attention of a young boy with distinctive red and white hair. Another adventurer recognizes him immediately, pointing him out as ours. Despite his small size, his reputation is immense. He is a special-grade adventurer. Ars offers a slight, knowing smile. He is known throughout the guild for his versatile combat style, skillfully wielding both weapons and magic, which has earned him his high rank. It is said that no adventurer in the guild is unaware of Ars. The bald man is asked why skeletons would fight bandits. He admits he has no idea, but he can confirm the rumors that bandits have been active in the area. Ars joins their discussion, adding that the bandits were indeed alive, but he found them tied up. He tried to pursue, but the culprits escaped. He then wonders about the identity of the people who were in the carriage. The cloaked man reveals his personal connection to the event, explaining that an acquaintance of his was on that very carriage, which is why he was listening so intently. The bald man reacts with surprise. Ars considers this. When he arrived on the scene, the passengers were already bound with rope. The entire situation is baffling. He turns his gaze downward to an unseen figure on the floor, only their gloved hand visible. He muses aloud about why skeletons would tie up bandits, admitting he doesn't understand it at all. Then, his expression softens as he says, "I see. Thank you." He strides into the Adventurers Guild, calling out for anyone willing to join him on an expedition to the eastern region. His announcement is met with discussion. One adventurer notes that the presence of skeletons implies a necromancer. Another, cloaked and listening intently, considers that it must be a master of considerable power to summon skeletons capable of defeating bandits. He continues his pitch with a confident smile, suggesting the necromancer might possess a valuable magic gem. The idea sparks greed in the crowd. One woman exclaims that a single gem is valuable enough to live on for a month and urges her companion to go. Skepticism arises from a woman with a ponytail, who points out that if bandits are being killed, the local lord is sure to dispatch his own soldiers. The spiky-haired adventurer beside her agrees, noting the large number of skeletons involved would certainly draw official attention, leaving little for them to claim. Despite the risks, his offer proves tempting. One man declares he's going. Another, lamenting that his usual party members are absent, decides to join as well. Others in the guild hall remain hesitant, quietly weighing whether the venture is truly safe. His recruitment drive is a success. The bald, scarred adventurer enthusiastically agrees, addressing Ars formally and declaring they should set off. With a pleased expression, Ars announces that since about 10 people have gathered, they can head for the carriages. Below, in the town square, the assembled party stands ready by a horse-drawn wagon. As the group travels, he reflects internally. He knows that bringing so many people will reduce his share of any reward, but considers it a necessary precaution. With this many adventurers, he reasons they should be prepared for any unforeseen circumstances. He hardens his expression, justifying his actions as a tactic for survival. At the very least, he thinks this large group will buy him enough time to escape if things go wrong. He silently hopes no one thinks poorly of him for his methods. The party arrives at the edge of a dense forest. Stepping onto the dirt path leading into the woods, he confirms to himself that this is the correct location. He halts abruptly, a sudden, unpleasant premonition washing over him. The adventurers behind him stop in confusion, one of them calling out to ask where Ars has gone. He remains still, unsettled by the feeling. Peeking over a ridge, he sees the group he assembled further down the path. One of the men is explaining that they are now approaching the Lord's domain where the bandits appeared. A quiet understanding dawns on Ars. Bringing a large group was indeed the right choice. On a narrow path, an armored soldier reflects on the mission. He acknowledges the significant power gap between his unit and high-level bandits, recognizing that carelessness is not an option. A strange sense of unease settles over him, a feeling that their unseen enemy is deliberately moving towards them. His thoughts are cut short by a sound from the surrounding woods. He halts, questioning the noise, his attention drawn by the disturbance. A small rock clatters down the embankment nearby. Spotting the movement, he immediately shouts a warning to his captain, pointing towards the source. The cause of the noise is revealed: a horse-drawn carriage flanked by more armored soldiers. The guards confirm that the official investigation team has finally arrived. Observing from a hidden vantage point, the hooded figure smirks. He confirms to himself that the carriage he allowed to pass the day before has successfully reported back to the city, just as he had foreseen. He assesses the newly arrived force, counting about 10 soldiers. Their professional atmosphere is distinct from the guards who had transported Milia. Noting the infantry escorting a carriage, he correctly identifies them as an investigation team. The dungeon master turns to him, asking for instructions. With a look of grim determination, the hooded figure confirms they will proceed with their plan, much to Reinald's surprise. The skeleton expresses his shock, questioning if his leader is truly serious, and stating that he himself wasn't. The hooded figure calmly dismisses his subordinates' concerns, implying the situation is not what it seems. Noticing Reinald's lack of enthusiasm, the dungeon master questions it. The hooded figure clarifies their immediate objective. They're simply going to reveal the labyrinth. With that, the dungeon master orders a reluctant Reinald to prepare. His face hardening into a fierce expression, he turns his attention to his unseen forces. He shouts out a command, asking if everyone is ready and giving them a mere 30 seconds to prepare. He had given them 30 seconds to prepare, but his skeletal minions required no such time, already sprinting into position with silent, unnerving speed. As they moved, the investigation team halted abruptly. A fissure began to snake across the ground before them, heralding the labyrinth's public reveal in just 10 seconds. His eyes narrowed with intense focus as he continued the count internally. He knew that simply revealing the labyrinth was not enough. There was no point if it didn't achieve his true objective. From her concealed position in the foliage, Fujian whispered the next number in the sequence. The protagonist's plan was clear in his mind. This was his answer to the dungeon's user experience. He wanted these investigators to return to the city and spread the word, turning his creation into the talk of the town. As the count reached 2, he recalled the structure of his operation. He was the user, the one experiencing the dungeon firsthand, supported by a team of skeletons diligently working at desks. But he was also the director, the designer, and the planner, the sole mind behind every aspect of its creation. With his role defined, he turned his attention to the final component. He thrust a hand toward the armored guards, roaring the announcement to his unseen forces. He identified the participants, the investigation team, specifically the squad led by the soldier captain. With a final, guttural command to execute, the ground before him exploded upwards in a shower of rock and earth. He bellowed at his skeletal forces as the labyrinth violently revealed itself. A sudden, deafening roar tears through the air as a section of the mountain explodes, triggering a massive landslide. Adventurers cry out in alarm, scrambling to escape the cascade of rock and debris. Amidst the chaos, the hooded young man watches the destruction, wondering what could have caused the mountain to collapse. He looks around in the aftermath, questioning if a golem has appeared. As the dust settles, a strange, dark fissure on the ground catches his eye. When the smoke finally clears to reveal the full extent of the change, his eyes widen in utter shock. Where the mountain once stood, a vast, unnaturally straight chasm has been carved into the earth. This is Hawk Hill, a place where adventurers who dream of riches come to have their wishes granted. A place where failure does not result in the loss of one's life. From a safe distance, a group of armored guards and other onlookers stare at the newly formed canyon, the ground still humming with the force of its creation. They gather at the precipice, peering down into the depths. The chasm walls are not natural rock, but are lined with what appears to be a man-made structure, the entrance to a massive complex. This, it is declared, is an ideal dungeon. Elsewhere, the hooded protagonist celebrates, holding a small device. He declares it a perfect success, exclaiming that the mountain collapsed exactly as planned, thanks to Reinl. He throws an arm around the skeleton, Reinl, cheering that they successfully attracted adventurers without involving any soldiers. Reinl seems to concur. Reinl then points out that the dungeon master is reacting in the same way as the other people. From an unseen location, the dungeon master's voice asks them to stop with the unresponsive reactions, prompting the protagonist to ask what it means. He expresses his own confusion, wondering aloud why a wall would appear so cleanly. He insists that the text carved into the outer wall should be perfectly readable. The nearby adventurers, including Fujian, simply stare back, completely bewildered. The chasm of Hawk Hill stands silent. The protagonist's thoughts echo, revealing the name was taken from the hidden village, and that his plan, complete with fireworks and sound effects, should have gone off without a hitch. He remained perplexed by the adventurer's muted response, unaware that the dungeon master had been the one to personally trigger the event. From a command room, the small, robed figure had orchestrated everything, even having the skeletons perform a countdown for the remote detonation. The result of this orchestration was a perfectly executed trap. The crumbled walls of the chasm were filled in once more, and, at the bottom, a special device was installed to absorb any fallen items with a space-refining effect. He felt a surge of satisfaction, turning to Reinl with a grin. He remarked how lucky it was that Reinl knew about gunpowder, as it allowed them to create an effect similar to small fireworks. Reinl, however, brought up a different concern. The skeleton noted that while the mechanism for projecting Kyo-chan's voice was impressive, a trap relying only on sound and vibration might be ineffective. It added that it had tried to speak with the voice's source to replicate it, but received no reply. At the mention of Kyo-chan, his expression froze. A sudden realization struck him as he noticed Fujian staring intently in his direction, her gaze fixed upon him. He turned to her, flustered, and asked what was wrong. He wondered aloud if the other adventurers had somehow overheard him whispering, even though he believed he was speaking only to her. Meanwhile, the other skeletons observed their master's behavior with confusion. Reinl quietly commented to the others that the boss had developed a habit of talking to empty space lately. Ignoring their chatter, he turned his frustration back to Reinl, pointing a finger accusingly. He insisted that the presentation's impact was more than sufficient and that his vocal explanations should have made everything clear. His agitation grew, and he began to shake the skeleton, complaining that Reinl simply didn't understand that there was no problem with the plan. Reinl could only let out a weary sigh. Reinl suddenly cut him off, pointing towards the chasm. The adventurers were finally on the move. The skeleton then offered a piece of advice, noting that the suspicious, pale-robed figure, their boss, should probably stop drawing so much attention to himself. As the adventurers arrive at the dungeon's location, the red-haired boy, Ars, collapses to the ground in a fit of laughter. He clutches his stomach, exclaiming what a ridiculous sight it is, while his companions look on, one with concern and the other with stoicism. His cloaked companion approaches, telling him it's not funny and that he's never seen anything like it. Wiping a tear from his eye, Ars admits that it was quite a performance. He rises to his feet as his two companions agree. The bald man asks if Ars understands what this place is, and Ars confidently affirms that he does. With a bright smile, he announces to his party that this is a dungeon, and its name is Horkill. His bald companion seems unimpressed, questioning if that's all there is to it, but Ars remains cheerful. He then turns his attention to a heavily armored soldier, addressing him as Soldier Captain. Ars asks for confirmation that this is their destination, noting that the soldiers themselves are retreating from the mountain. The captain affirms this is correct. He clarifies that while the mountain castle was located between the forest and the town, this dungeon is a different matter entirely, gesturing toward the entrance. Following the captain's gesture, Ars gazes at the carved-out mountainside. He processes the captain's words, realizing this must be the new dungeon where the necromancer is said to be. His expression hardens with resolve. He declares that they will go, because they are adventurers. He explains that while the origins of treasures from dungeons are often unknown, it's said that as long as a dungeon master is alive, the probability of finding untouched riches is high. He turns to rally his companions, shouting for them to move out. They respond with a unified cheer. Internally, Ars considers that there will likely be traps, just like before, and he is determined to be the first one to step inside. The entrance to the dungeon looms before them, a vast area carved directly from the mountainside, creating a wide, barren clearing that leads into the darkness. He steps into the dungeon's entrance, his gaze falling upon a pile of collapsed rock and earth. As the dust settles, he contemplates the path ahead, wondering just how much magical power would be required to overcome the spells and traps that surely lay in wait. His attention is then drawn upward to a peculiar sight, glowing letters carved into the very air. He finds the inscription concerning, but realizes with some frustration that he cannot use the air float spell to get a closer look, as he has not yet mastered it. As he stands there muttering to himself, one of his companions, the woman with the ponytail, calls out to him, asking why he is mumbling. He turns, his question left unanswered. The group proceeds further inside, and he stops short, his eyes widening in disbelief at the scene before them. He can only stammer, questioning where they could possibly be. Suddenly, the spiky-haired adventurer calls out for everyone's attention. He points toward a nearby object, identifying it with confusion as a chair. Following his lead, the small elf child points out other furnishings, a counter, and numerous tables spread across the vast room. The child remarks that it looks as though a restaurant is about to open for business. The bald, scarred man walks deeper into the space, marveling at its size and noting that it's large enough to host a grand banquet. The spiky-haired man calls out to him as they continue to explore. Meanwhile, the woman with the ponytail observes that another section of the room resembles market stalls. She then points out a staircase leading to a second floor, surmising that the layout, with its many rooms, is just like an inn. Ars listens to his companion's discoveries, his expression growing more bewildered by the second. The absurdity of it all sinks in, and then attached to a dungeon, a banquet hall within a restaurant, something is deeply wrong. Finally, he can't contain his disbelief any longer and shouts that the entire situation is utterly nonsensical. His party members watch his outburst as the cloaked man calmly calls for him to come over. As he and his companions stood baffled by the inn, one of them pointed down a pristine brick hallway, announcing that they had found the dungeon's entrance. They gathered before it, only to find a notice posted on the wall. It stated that more areas would be opened based on completion status, and required an entrance fee of 1 silver coin. Most bizarrely, a footnote assured them that the dungeon posed absolutely no danger to their lives and encouraged them to participate freely. The absurdity of the situation was too much for Ars. A strained expression crossed his face as he muttered to himself that this was completely illogical. The hooded young man clutches his head in frustration, declaring the situation absurd. Beside him, the skeleton Reinal gestures emphatically, trying to reason with his boss. The young man shouts, telling him to be quiet, reminding him that he already said no. Below, a line of skeletons watches as their master continues to yell, calling the whole affair nonsensical and noisy. He calms slightly, his expression weary as he quietly wonders to himself if it was truly that absurd. The nearby skeletons nod their heads in unison, as if agreeing with his unspoken thoughts. His thoughts drift to the plan he had just rejected, luring in adventurers for his skeletons to kill. Also, he could level up. He dismisses the idea again. The very notion is distasteful, a murderous appeal emanating even from their bones. A sly grin spreads across his face as he changes his demeanor entirely. He asks if they truly don't understand his strategy. With confidence, he asserts that every promotion requires a goal, and his strategy is simply to achieve that goal. Reinal, utterly lost, asks him to stop if he doesn't understand the meaning himself. But the young man launches into a lecture filled with strange business terms about compliance, conversions, and KPIs. He yells at them, questioning if they ever considered how to legally obtain money, calling them fools. His expression becomes serious again as he considers his limitations. Maze magic, he explains, is difficult to handle. He had thought about setting up a restaurant or an inn, but such establishments cannot be used within a dungeon. He continues, clarifying that the only means available to him are installation-type traps. This doesn't mean he intends to harm adventurers, but rather that traps are the only way to defeat an opponent. With this realization, he concludes there is only one thing to be done. Meanwhile, in a nearby alley, a group of adventurers gathers. Their apparent leader, a man in a dark turtleneck, asks a red-haired boy named Ars if he's fine with going first. The leader then remarks that he was sure the entrance was around here, but he can't seem to find it. He then holds up a silver coin and instructs Ars to put it into a small, square slot that has just appeared in the brick wall. Ars stares, surprised by the sudden appearance of the mechanism. Before Ars can act, the leader vanishes through the wall. The remaining adventurers cry out in shock. Where did he go? One asks. Ars looks on in disbelief, a dreadful possibility dawning on him. He stares at the spot where his leader vanished, a chilling realization striking him. It's a teleportation magic trap, triggered by the insertion of a silver coin. The thought is unsettling. It was a dangerous mechanism he himself had considered creating first. His companions are bewildered. The bald man demands to know what happened, while the cloaked man suggests someone follow. Ars remains silent, but the bald man quickly dismisses the idea, stating they cannot act if it is indeed a teleportation trap. A grim certainty settles upon him. He concludes with regret that the first adventurer to insert a coin is already dead. The thought is so horrifying that he lets out a cry of disbelief. His shout attracts the attention of another group of adventurers who have just rounded the corner. One of them, a man in a dark top, calls out, asking if he's serious. The man presses him, asking what he means and confirming that Ars's leader just teleported. He jealously assumes the leader was sent to some kind of feast or special event, cursing his own failure to find it first. Before a response can be given, yet another party arrives. A man in armor tells his companions to calm down, pointing out a massive silver coin embedded in the wall. The entire group's eyes light up with greed. Excited by the prospect of treasure, the spiky-haired man's party surges forward, ready to enter. Ars tries to stop them, declaring that he will be next. As coins clink, one of the other adventurers calls out to him, halting his protest. The corridor falls silent again, leaving Ars alone with his two remaining companions. He turns to them, wondering aloud what they should do. He admits that he is curious, but the situation has an undeniable allure. He decides to wait, leaning against the brick wall with his arms crossed. Time passes slowly, and he estimates it has been about 10 minutes. Elsewhere, the spiky-haired adventurer clenches his fist. He reports to his companion that in that time, 7 more adventurers returned and went back inside. He was wary at first, but now, besides the 2 of them, no one else is left. Deciding that the potential reward outweighs the unknown risk, Ars inserts a coin into the wall slot with a metallic clink, resolving to investigate the trap himself. He is instantly transported into a vast, empty chamber with a tiled floor. He stands there, momentarily stunned, realizing the room is completely bare save for the silver monument he had seen from the entrance. He approaches the silver ingots, a sense of unease growing within him. It strikes him as peculiar that the silver, left exposed, shows no signs of rust or tarnish. Furthermore, it appears to be coated in oil, yet even the oil shows no signs of degradation. Suddenly, a disembodied voice echoes through the chamber, startling him. It announces the rules. To proceed, he must press a button on the wall, which will illuminate the traversable panels. Only one path will be lit at a time. If any part of his body or clothing touches a panel outside the designated path, he will be immediately ejected. Ars turns his attention to the button on the wall, his mind racing. He wonders where the other adventurers were sent. Since the silver monument is here, he reasons he must be in the same room they entered, not a different one. He glances across the enormous expanse of the tiled floor, briefly entertaining the thought that there could be multiple identical rooms. He quickly dismisses this as unlikely. It would be too difficult to maintain dozens of such rooms. He concludes that to pass this trial, he is expected to memorize the sequence of non-trap panels. The sheer scale of the task becomes apparent. The room is 30 meters on each side, with each panel measuring 50 centimeters. This means the floor is comprised of approximately 3,600 individual panels, all of which look identical. Putting his theory to the test, Ars raises his foot and brings it down with force. The floor panel cracks and shatters under the impact. He considers the dungeon's nature. While natural dungeons can be altered by destroying parts of them, this one is supported by a dungeon master, making it fundamentally indestructible. The thought of memorizing all 3,600 panels seems impossible. He realizes this must be the dungeon master's design, and that there must be another, less obvious way to proceed. He noticed a single, prominent button on the wall near the room's entrance. With a look of intrigued surprise, he reached out and pressed it. In response, a path of illuminated tiles materialized across the vast floor. He observed that the light didn't extend all the way to the silver tablet at the far end, a curious detail. He understood this to be the traversable route. The glowing path then vanished. He quickly committed the sequence to memory. 6 steps straight, then 6 steps to the right. Believing he now knew the way, he felt confident he could proceed. He began to walk the memorized route, but after only a few steps, the safe tiles beneath his feet flickered and disappeared. He stopped short, clicking his tongue in annoyance as he realized the trap was not so simple. His confidence shattered. He frantically tried to recall the next step. Suddenly, a disembodied voice echoed through the room, stating that he had been warned to pay close attention. The voice declared that this was as far as he would go, a shame since the route to the goal was right there. Inside a large, mostly empty hall, the young adventurer Ars points in surprise at the hooded figure standing nearby. He asks if the figure, whom he addresses as Ars-san, had also attempted the challenge. He reacts with disbelief when the hooded man mentions his failure, questioning when and why it happened. The hooded man calmly explains that Ars's particular brand of failure is actually quite difficult to achieve. The memory flashes through Ars's mind. As he had reached up to check the route, his hand inadvertently brushed against the teleportation magic trap hidden on the ceiling panel, causing him to panic. In an instant, he was whisked away by the trap's magic, crying out in frustration at having failed due to such a rudimentary mistake. Elsewhere, in a control room, the hooded man gazes at a large monitor displaying data. He points excitedly, exclaiming to Reinl that adventurers are secretly participating in their venture. The skeleton agrees, observing alongside him. He notes that for the very beginning, their pace is good. The screen displays statistics for the beginner course, showing 1630 active participants and an acquisition of 51 silver coins. The monitor provides further details, displaying the number of rooms in operation, the average silver coin acquisition rate, and a maximum and minimum distances cleared by the participants. The hooded man silently calculates the value of the currency. He recalls that 1 silver coin is worth about 500 yen, and that 10 copper coins make a silver, which is enough to stay at a normal inn for a night. He concludes that a reward of 1 silver coin per challenge seems fair. He turns to his companion, asking if it's all right to continue as they have been. Reinl, placing a hand on his skull, confirms that so far, no one has succeeded. The hooded man declares that this is only natural. In fact, he would be in trouble if anyone actually succeeded. Reinl looks on in confusion as the man thinks to himself that he hasn't yet collected enough silver coins to forge into silver bars. He listened as Reinl questioned why anyone would continue to attempt a dungeon no one can clear. The skeleton mused that humans are clever creatures, but the hooded young man countered that he, too, has planned for the unexpected. A strange thought surfaced, a memory of a different kind of challenge. A user who, after 3 Q&A web events, managed to produce an impossible error. A voice had simply said, "Well, just watch." Reinl, picking up on his master's train of thought, asked if he truly believed humans could devise such unexpected plans. The young man explained his philosophy using the analogy of a crane game. The best approach is to make it seem simple. Let them fail, and they will become determined to spend money. He confirmed that this was precisely his strategy. It was within his expectations that some adventurers would simply rush toward the silver bars, triggering the teleportation magic he had set. Those individuals were instantly removed from the dungeon. He had already accounted for other tactics as well. Adventurers attempting to walk on walls, those trying to dash through the room in under 5 seconds, or others attempting to smash the floor panels. All such strategies have been anticipated and countered. Reinl, impressed, wondered if any other dungeon employed such a teleportation trap. He admitted he didn't know what his boss was assuming, but he was aware that humanity's greatest weapon is its intelligence. With a confident smirk, the dungeon master gestured towards his monitors. "Look," he said, drawing Reinl's attention to a group of adventurers who had gathered around a table and begun to strategize. Reinl and 2 other skeletons, now wearing dark glasses, shrugged in unison. He pointed out that from their perspective, it just looked like their boss was staring intently at the adventurers. The comment caught the young man off guard, a flicker of embarrassment on his face. Meanwhile, one of the adventurers meticulously recorded his findings. He noted that in his 4 attempts, the room's appearance was identical, but the trap patterns changed every time. Furthermore, he hadn't encountered a single other person inside. The group processed this information. This implied the dungeon contained multiple rooms and, therefore, multiple silver bars. One adventurer wondered if the bars could be fake, but a dark-haired woman in their party spoke with certainty. Though she wasn't an expert on minerals, she was sure the light emanating from the bar was unmistakably that of real silver. While one group of adventurers began to unravel the dungeon's secrets, another, led by a determined man with spiky hair, reached a similar conclusion. He explained to the young, red-haired boy, Ars, that the dungeon was far more cunning than it appeared. He was certain that simply grabbing the silver was a trap, and that the entire structure was designed to prevent a straightforward victory. His words resonated with Ars, who pondered the dungeon's design. He considered the presence of restaurants and lodging facilities, questioning their purpose. This, he mused, was something he had anticipated. His companions debated the same point. The woman with the ponytail correctly deduced that the facilities were built on the premise of repeated attempts. The bald, scarred man added a crucial point. If the dungeon were impossible and the silver rewards were constantly being taken, adventurers would eventually give up and stop coming altogether. The logic seemed contradictory, leaving them puzzled. As they struggled with the paradox, a realization struck Ars. He understood the core principle. The key wasn't a single, grand victory, but the fact that adventurers were achieving small successes, winning here and there. This, he concluded, was the crucial element that kept people coming back. From a distance, the hooded dungeon master observed the group's breakthrough. He had anticipated this level of insight, especially from the boy he mentally dubbed Ars. He mused that once they grew accustomed to the patterns, they would clear the dungeon with relative ease and would likely stay for some time to do so. His prediction proved accurate as the spiky-haired man rallied his team. He reminded them of the silver bars they'd already acquired, pointing out that this was merely the beginner's course. He theorized that the more advanced levels must hold even greater rewards, a possibility that visibly energized his companions. Fueled by this prospect, Ars approached a registration counter, his expression set with determination, and declared his intent to challenge the dungeon again. The hooded figure watched, satisfied. His worst fear, that the 4-kill course would prove too discouraging, had been averted. The attendant behind the counter, however, delivered some unexpected news. After thanking them for their patronage of 4-kill, he informed the group that at sunset, the dungeon would close for the day, and no further entries would be permitted. He continued, clarifying the new rule. Anyone remaining inside past the deadline would be forcibly ejected from the premises. Crucially, he added, their entrance fees would not be returned. The announcement sent a shockwave through the assembled adventurers. A wave of outrage swept through the crowd as they protested the sudden imposition of a time limit, shouting that it was completely unreasonable. The hooded dungeon master watched the chaos unfold, a single thought echoing the crowd's sentiment. Unreasonable. He pulls his hood up, a confident smile on his face, seemingly unbothered by the adventurers' outrage. With a polite farewell, he tells them he awaits their next visit. The first day's results for Fork Hill are tallied. A total of 89 silver coins in sales, with no adventurers yet managing to conquer even the beginner level. And so, nestled amongst the trees, the dungeon stands ready. This marked the beginning of what would later become the legendary dungeon known as Fork Hill. Inside a shop, a man with slick-back light hair touches his neck wearily. He instructs an unseen individual to try their hand at peddling something on their own for a while. The individual is revealed to be a young man with long, light hair and glasses, struggling under the weight of a wooden crate. He lets out a quiet sigh of resignation. As he departs, the shopkeeper and a woman in a bonnet watch him go. The woman remarks that the boy, Lucas, seems a bit unreliable. The shopkeeper agrees, stating that while he's providing the initial capital, a bit of hardship is necessary for Lucas to succeed in the business. 2 months later, Lucas, now in more formal attire, sips from a cup. He reflects that while his funds have returned, he still hasn't managed to begin his peddling venture. He sits at a table with 2 other men, inquiring if they have been to a particular dungeon. One confirms they have, but refers to it as Fork Hill. Lucas presses further, asking if the location is truly safe. The conversation reveals that no one has set up shop near Fork Hill yet, and that prices there would be higher than in town. With the dungeon's clearing date unknown, Lucas decides he must go and investigate the situation for himself. His investigation leads him to the dungeon's entrance, where he is met with a shocking sight. A massive encampment of adventurers fills the area. Tents, campfires, and dozens of people create a bustling, temporary settlement. He wonders what is going on. Returning to the tavern, he learns from the men that about 50 people are visible from the outside alone. Considering those already inside the dungeon, it's a significant boom. Lucas realizes with dismay that his money is rapidly being spent. His gaze drifts across the room to a young woman with short, dark hair. She is watching the red-haired boy, Ars, who is absorbed in a book. She muses to herself that the only one profiting from this situation is likely Ars's master. She then turns her attention to Lucas, who has approached her table, and asks if he managed to get a treasure chest. Seeing his confusion, she gives him a thumbs up and advises him to just try it out, declaring that practice is better than study. She leans forward, dismissing his concerns with a confident air. She points out that as a merchant, his life isn't on the line, unlike the adventurers who might struggle to even clear the dungeon. Lucas, his expression serious, clarifies that he is, in fact, a merchant. The woman seems to understand immediately. Despite his apparent hesitation, she presses him to simply try it, stating it will cost 1 silver coin. She then leans back with a smirk, offering a quick apology for her rudeness. She clarifies that what she meant was the entrance fee for the dungeon is 1 silver coin. Lucas can only stare, taken aback by the information. His decision made, Lucas walks forward, his steps firm as he approaches an entrance-marked beginner course. Inside, he finds himself in a stark, tiled corridor and wonders about the strange panels on the wall. The rules of this place are absolute. One must press a button to reveal the passable panels. Stepping on any other surface results in immediate ejection. He proceeds cautiously, his footsteps echoing softly in the vast, checkered chamber. This is nothing like a typical dungeon, where a party would fight monsters to acquire materials and treasure. This place presents no such mysteries to solve, and more importantly, it poses no risk to one's life. The stark contrast deepens his confusion. With a hand to his chin, he wonders aloud, what is this? His mind races, questioning the purpose and the underlying mechanism of this strange place. Who could have created it? He observes that while adventurers have adapted quickly, it's a system that merchants like himself might not be able to navigate. He briefly considers asking the dungeon master, but dismisses the idea, certain they would never explain why they created such a thing. Then, a faint smile appears as a new understanding dawns. Of course, that's how it is. He adjusted his glasses, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He was certain now, the only way to meet the dungeon's creator was to be a human who had cleared this place. He turned from the counter, his decision made. Behind him, the unseen proprietor accepted his payment as he walked purposefully across the checkered floor. 1 day prior, the hooded dungeon master had a very different concern. He stood before his skeletal subordinate, Reincarnated, cheering triumphantly over a massive pile of silver coins spilling across a table. Reincarnated could only stare, impressed by the mountain of silver. He proudly explained the dungeon's performance to his skeletal staff. In 7 days of operation, they had earned 1,155 silver coins from 90 visitors. He noted that while the retention rate was high for the first day, it dropped to 45% by the third. He concluded that they desperately needed a system to encourage continued play and acquire new users. He laughed, speaking of KPIs, a term from a past life that left Reincarnated utterly bewildered. In his mind's eye, he saw a former colleague, a memory of a time when he used such corporate jargon as if he were still a university student. Standing before the hoard of currency, Reinl asked if it would be possible to forge a single silver bar from it all. The dungeon master confirmed it was, but noted a critical problem. They had no way of knowing the actual silver content of the coins. To solve this, he decided to handle it himself. Announcing he would perform a spatial refinement, he reached out, using his power to analyze and extract the pure silver from the coins, magically shaping it into ingots. The process yielded 2 large, gleaming silver ingots. The dungeon master thought they looked smaller than he'd hoped. Reinl, however, was astounded that the boss could perform such a feat on his own, musing that it was a task that would normally require a skilled craftsman. The thought lingered with the dungeon master. The protagonist then asked Reinl about placing these ingots in the various boss rooms. When he mentioned there were currently 40 rooms, Reinl and another skeleton excitedly calculated that they would need a total of 120 ingots. The true purpose of the ingots was then revealed. A diagram showed the new mechanism. Touching an ingot at the goal would trigger a teleportation trap. With a devious grin, the dungeon master explained his plan to send adventurers who had struggled to pay the fee straight outside, having cleared the dungeon with a mere 5 copper coins for their trouble. He explained his refined plan to Reinl. By teleporting adventurers to a goal room with just a single, genuine item, their objective would be met. The skeleton acknowledged the simple brilliance of the idea as the dungeon master carefully placed the silver ingot on its pedestal. Shortly after, the system registered a success. The dungeon master announced that a single person had cleared the dungeon. The hooded youth's expression soured, realizing with annoyance that a particular individual had arrived. The successful adventurer, a red-haired boy named Ars, examined the silver ingot he had claimed. He smirked, musing that he had faced a rather clever opponent. Back in the control room, the dungeon master reported that Ars appeared to be a special rank adventurer. Reinl elaborated on the ranking system, explaining that adventurers are categorized as lower, middle, or upper class, with special rank being the pinnacle above them all. He added that reaching the even higher star ranks requires a royal recommendation, an incredibly difficult feat. The hooded youth voiced his frustration. They had lost the silver, the boss was defeated instantly, and their funds were back to 0. He decided that a single ingot was too paltry a reward and that this incident could be used as a promotion. He declared that 3 silver ingots would now be the prize for the Hawk Hill dungeon, a significant leap in value. He envisioned the outcome. Ours would showcase the 100% pure silver ingot, and word of this incredible prize would spread like wildfire, causing a surge in adventurers visiting their dungeon. The dungeon master finally grasped the marketing strategy. Reinl, impressed, asked if this entire scenario had been anticipated from the moment the dungeon was built. The youth confirmed it was all part of the plan. The skeleton then posed a critical question. What would they do if Ars decided to challenge the dungeon again, especially since they had no more silver to offer as a reward? The skeleton grew agitated, pointing out that their supply couldn't possibly keep up with such a challenger. Unfazed, the hooded youth crossed his arms and stated a simple rule. The dungeon could only be cleared once per day. Reinl was taken aback by this simple yet effective limitation. The dungeon master inquired about the mechanism for this, mentioning biometric authentication. The youth affirmed this, explaining that even if Ars attempted to re-enter, the system would prevent him. He elaborated on the process. Upon clearing the dungeon, the system scans and registers the individual's iris pattern. This data is then used to identify them on subsequent entry attempts within the same day, effectively blocking them. He proudly explains his iris authentication system to Reinl and the dungeon master, calling it an unconventional but well-executed idea. With a smug expression, he notes that such technology isn't even popular in Japan yet, clearly pleased with his own ingenuity. Reinl, processing this, asked what is planned for Ars next. The protagonist clarifies that while the intermediate level is the eventual goal, it's still some time away. He wants to let the news of Ars' success spread to attract more challengers, so he will allow Ars to try again tomorrow, a decision that visibly startles the skeleton. He then turns to Ars and his party to deliver the news directly, stating the new rule. Only 1 clear is possible per day. As Reinl interjects that it isn't about the silver reward, the protagonist adds that for the next challenge, Ars will need to have leveled up. Internally, the protagonist revels in his strategy. He reasons that with each clear, the dungeon will become progressively harder, making it impossible for a first-timer. For Ars to succeed a second time, it will take several days, buying him the time he needs to gather more silver. He chuckles to himself, convinced his plan is perfect. His confidence is shattered the very next day. He learns that another person has already cleared the dungeon, leaving him in disbelief. Reinl exclaims in shock that materials from high-level adventurers are already piling up. Reinl examines the reward altar, observing to another skeleton that while transfer magic was cast on the silver ingot that was there, the altar itself is now completely empty. Meanwhile, in another chamber, the protagonist adjusts his hood, visibly troubled. Lucas watches him as he mutters to himself that this has become a real problem. Lucas confronts the small, hooded figure, his expression serious. He asks if it is perhaps the dungeon master. The creature simply affirms. He processes the confirmation, his gaze steady. So this was it, the dungeon master of the sage's soul. the one who had chosen such an unconventional dungeon. The dungeon master speaks, stating it has a mountain of questions, but whether it receives answers depends on Lucas. It seems to be taking the initiative, but Lucas cuts in, asking what it wants to say. To his shock, the creature suddenly prostrates itself on the floor, offering a profuse apology. Lucas, taken aback, questions the sudden gesture. The dungeon master explains that it didn't expect him to clear the floor so quickly and hasn't prepared the next one yet. He glances at the empty supply pedestal, sweat beading on his brow. The path forward is completely unseen, and the promised provisions are missing. The dungeon master continues its plea, begging him not to be angry. It confesses that it meant to give him silver, but made a mistake and only left a single piece, comparing its failure to a student making excuses for not repaying a loan on time. Lucas's expression hardens as he looks down at the creature. He silently questions the true nature of this dungeon master of the sage's soul. He considers that this might be a test to gauge his character, to see if he is a man consumed by greed. With this thought, he resolves to remain vigilant. Adjusting his glasses, Lucas states firmly that he doesn't need the silver. The dungeon master pops up, overjoyed, and exclaims that it will apologize properly. It then performs a perfect dejiza, a formal ground bow that Lucas recognizes as a uniquely Japanese custom of prostration. The dungeon master mutters about getting his hopes up only to let him down. Seizing the moment, Lucas declares that in exchange for the silver, he wants something else. He realizes this is his chance to take control of the conversation, leaving the creature looking up in surprise. He begins by asking what the dungeon master wants, sarcastically offering bones for a dog. He quickly dismisses this, stating that he doesn't need bones, but rather wants to be taught something. The dungeon master, in turn, asks what he wishes to learn. In response to the question, his gaze lowers as he considers his query. He wonders about the dungeon master's true purpose for creating this place, musing if it was for something as mundane as a legitimate meal. He voices his suspicion, questioning if the dungeon master's inquiry was a feint. He demands to know the true purpose behind the dungeon's construction, asserting that a mere need for sustenance couldn't possibly justify such an intricate creation, complete with teleportation traps. The cloaked figure offers only a quiet, evasive sound in reply. This non-answer startles Lucas, who presses for a real response, questioning the sudden silence. The dungeon master's composure shatters. He erupts, shouting and accusing Lucas of having seen through his inexperience. The outburst catches Lucas completely off guard, causing him to recoil in shock. He can only stammer in confusion, utterly baffled by the bizarre confession. As he stands speechless, two small, floating eye-like entities manifest from the dungeon master's being. They flit about erratically, accusing Lucas of mocking their master and comparing his insolence to that of someone named Rhino. He processes the chaotic scene and comes to a sharp realization. The dungeon master, despite his outburst, is incredibly intelligent. From the trap room onward, the being has been reading his every move, testing his intellect by controlling the flow of their dialogue. Acknowledging the creature's cunning, he concedes defeat in this mental spar. Having regained his composure, the dungeon master calmly asks what the matter is. He states that he had assumed Lucas had already deduced his true objective from their first meeting. He sighs, pressing a hand to his forehead. He begins to explain his past, recounting his time in business school, where he was constantly in the company of two others nicknamed the Geniuses. He admits that he long ago abandoned any hope of outsmarting people like them. The dungeon master listens, perplexed by this sudden, seemingly irrelevant monologue. He began his story, explaining that his parents had always described him as having a laid-back personality, but that they considered it a good trait. He continued, reflecting on how he inherited the family shop and expanded it, never imagining a rival merchant would appear to challenge him. The prospect, he admitted, was thrilling. As he walked through the dungeon, he realized that nothing about it felt conventional. He couldn't fathom what kind of dungeon master would create such a labyrinth, reawakening a sense of the unknown he had long since forgotten. Suddenly, he spun around and rushed toward the dungeon master, his face alight with a startling intensity. He declared that this was the first time he'd had such a conversation, and that the dungeon master's profound ignorance was a sign of a kindred spirit. Getting uncomfortably close, he pleaded for the dungeon master to teach him everything. The hooded figure, taken aback by the sudden proximity, apologized for getting carried away, clarifying that he simply wanted to talk. The dungeon master seemed to accept this, though remained visibly flustered. He then asked if Lucas had cleared the dungeon before. Lucas confirmed that he had, and that he remembered it. When asked how many attempts it took, he replied that this was his first, which seemed to impress the dungeon master. The dungeon master considered this for a moment before making a proposal. Lucas would set up and run a business right there in that very room. He elaborated on the plan, suggesting Lucas sell food and provide lodging for adventurers. Selling daily necessities would also be a good idea, he added, as a vision of the proposed shop came to mind. The dungeon master asked if he understood, but Lucas erupted with manic glee. "I don't understand," he shouted, trembling with excitement. He declared that not understanding was precisely what made it so much fun. Lucas quickly clarified his outburst. Of course he would sell things, he explained, because the dungeon was set to close after today. Therefore, he had to provide a compelling reason for it to remain open. He enthusiastically accepts the proposal, declaring that he understands and will begin at once. The dungeon master calmly acknowledges his agreement. Meanwhile, Two adventurers converse near the dungeon's entrance. The woman with the ponytail expresses her surprise at needing to acquire knowledge there, but her companion with spiky hair sees it as an opportunity, noting that it would give them more time to talk. Their conversation turns to the hooded figure standing with them. The man with spiky hair remarks that there was no danger whatsoever, and the woman concurs, calling it utterly unconventional. The hooded protagonist simply agrees, confirming that it is, in fact, an unconventional dungeon. Back in the dungeon's depths, a woman with short, spiky hair approaches Lucas and asks if he is all right, while the dungeon master laughs heartily. As Lucas covers his mouth, a profound thought strikes him. This is the first time he has encountered a being that has given him such deep hope. Before he can fully process this, she boldly declares that she will be his first disciple and the first to do business in this new establishment. With that, she turns and walks away, announcing she's returning to town and will be back the next day. His shock quickly turns to frantic realization as he calculates the logistics. It would take over 3 hours just to run to the nearest town. It is a known flaw of the merchant Lucas. He has a tendency to overthink things to the point of panic. Along a brick-lined street, a new establishment has opened, a general store named Hill's Shop. Next to it, a cheerful man in an apron tends the counter of the bustling Hill's restaurant. Just beyond, the doors to the hawk and stand open, ready to welcome travelers. R stands in the street, utterly bewildered. He thinks to himself that none of these buildings were here yesterday. Elsewhere, Lucas calmly explains the pricing for lodging. He states that a single room costs 12 silver coins per night. A shared room is 8 silver, and a large dormitory-style room is only 4 silver coins. At the Hawkins reception desk, the innkeeper asks Ars if he would be amenable to a shared room. Ars agrees, noting that lodging guests get their currency exchange fees waived. He gratefully hands over a single gold coin, and the innkeeper confirms receipt. He is led to a spacious dormitory. A notice clarifies the inn's details. It has 15 guest rooms with a maximum capacity of 60 people. The large room he is in can hold 10 people, with a minimum of 2 required for use. The innkeeper gestures towards the bunk beds, explaining that this is his room and that the toilet is located next to the door. Later, on the 3rd floor, the innkeeper confirms the location with Lucas. Lucas explains that what he sees is a botan benjo, a common type of toilet in his world. He elaborates that in most regions, a magic stone is inserted once a day to decompose waste and purify the area. He concludes by stating that since the toilets absorb everything, they pose no problem. The innkeeper can only stare back, utterly dumbfounded by the concept. The innkeeper explains the function of a modern-looking sink. He clarifies that pressing the button causes water to flow for a fixed duration, powered by a water magic stone. Reassuringly, he adds that there is no charge for the magic stones and guests are free to use the facility as they please. He then offers Lucas a discount card for the associated restaurant and advises him to report any further inconveniences. Lucas accepts the card with a quiet acknowledgement. With the innkeeper's departure, Lucas is left alone at the front desk, a thoughtful expression on his face as he adjusts his glasses. His contemplation is broken when the hooded protagonist appears, addressing him as Sensei. Startled, Lucas questions the title, pointing out that he is the one who is the student in their arrangement. He shifts the topic, confirming that they have successfully opened for business as promised, though he notes that customers have yet to arrive. The hooded youth quietly agrees. The youth gazes out, considering the reason for the slow start. He muses that many adventurers prefer to camp in tents outside the dungeon rather than stay within it, but notes that he has his own ideas on how to address that. He concludes that if the inn is made comfortable enough, adventurers will choose to stay. With the toilets and sinks already a significant improvement, he identifies the bath as the next crucial feature. From the doorway, Lucas asks specifically about the bath. He asks Lucas what kind of bath is popular in the region. Lucas confirms that steam baths are preferred. This gives the hooded youth an idea for a sauna, contemplating a system to heat and control the temperature. Intrigued, Lucas agrees to try it out. The hooded protagonist then asks if there are any other inconveniences he's noticed. He dismisses the concern, stating that as an amateur in customer service, this inn is perfectly suited for him. He then earnestly declares that he wants to learn everything his teacher has to impart, solidifying their mentor-student dynamic. He began by outlining the logistical challenges. First, there was the matter of linens. With the river too far for efficient washing, there was no suitable place to clean and dry them. Furthermore, moving large furniture like beds was already narrowing the corridors. He then pointed out a more fundamental issue. The building's east-facing orientation gave it a gloomy impression overall. He stressed, a lot to be done. In response, the hooded figure calmly stated he understood and could handle it in 2 or 3 days. Lucas was flabbergasted, exclaiming in disbelief at the impossibly short time frame. His mentor, however, was already thinking ahead. He knew that expanding the layout with dungeon magic was simple enough, but he realized more people would be arriving soon. Preparations had to be completed before then. Later, Lucas approached him again, reporting that he sensed an increase in the number of people present. The hooded figure, seated at a desk, acknowledged the observation and asked what was happening at this hour. He explained that, as of 1 p.m., the number of dungeon challengers had increased by a base of 20 compared to the previous day. He asked if his mentor was recording the numbers, to which the hooded figure replied that it was more akin to statistics. Lucas, adjusting his glasses, asserted that the number of visitors is the most important indicator. He questioned if statistics was a common field of study, then answered his own query, stating that there are specialized institutions of higher learning dedicated to it. He elaborated that while he had always considered statistics essential for business, he felt that very few people actually put the discipline into practice. He believed there was significant value in being one of the few who did. He confidently predicted that, for now, the number of challengers would inevitably increase, and so would the number of guests at their inn. The people who had arrived today were those who heard that ours had acquired silver the day before. The next wave, he warned, would arrive soon. He contemplated this next wave. The silver ours had obtained was pure silver. He envisioned that once word of its immense monetary value spread, a new throng of adventurers would surely come flocking to their door. He bursts into the room, incredulous at the mention of pure silver and amazed that the hooded figure could have foreseen the next wave of adventurers. The hooded protagonist calmly confirms it, directing Lucas to trust his own predictions, while internally acknowledging that a second wave is indeed coming. He clears his throat, a blush rising on his cheeks as he tries to regain his composure, puzzled by the hooded figure's apparent excitement. He begins his explanation, stating that the most valuable information to spread is the simple fact that this dungeon offers proper rewards. However, he notes that there is another, more crucial element to consider. He presses the point, confirming that the hooded figure has heard the rumors of pure silver. The hooded figure affirms this, internally processing the implications of 100% pure silver, which seems to confirm Lucas's suspicions. He elaborates on the significance, explaining that refining silver to 100% purity is impossible with current technology. The cupellation process always leaves trace impurities. Because of this, he concludes, the demand for truly pure silver will be immense. The hooded figure realizes this must be one of the dungeon master's unique functions. He reflects that in the past, he had rarely made use of the ability to refine pure silver. With a snap of his fingers, Lucas excitedly declares that once word of pure silver spreads, people will flock to the dungeon from all over, creating the very wave he predicted. He praises the hooded figure's business acumen, admitting he'd never considered such a strategy. The concept of branding comes to the hooded figure's mind. The hooded figure holds up 2 fingers, outlining the 2 core tenets of his strategy, ensuring there is absolutely no risk to life and providing rewards that cannot be obtained anywhere else. He continues, questioning if any other combination of factors could be more appealing. He emphasizes that anyone can take on the challenge, with no cues to wait in and no rivals to fight, leaving Lucas momentarily speechless. He reflects further on his plan. A dungeon is meaningless if the surrounding area, with threats like wolves, is unsafe. To counter this, a commercial facility is necessary. This would not only eliminate danger during the adventurer's stay, but also provide a clean and comfortable environment, reducing the risk of illness. In response to his plan, Lucas's face lights up with manic glee. He declares that the protagonist's earlier words were far too modest. This is precisely why he scouted him. The hooded youth simply agrees with a deadpan aha. He muses aloud, realizing that the hooded youth has an innate understanding of branded concepts. The dungeon master, observing from a nearby chair, interjects, asking about the plate he saw Lucas hand to an adventurer. Lucas sheepishly admits he had it made without asking. The hooded protagonist clarifies that he had plates distributed featuring the Hawk Hill name as a motif, something he considers a part of his branding strategy. With a flourish and a smug grin, Lucas presents one of the plates directly to him. He notes the intense look in the protagonist's eyes, questioning if it's the gaze of zealot. He takes the offered plate, examining its maze-like design. The protagonist thanks him, explaining that he paid extra to have it crafted overnight. Lucas, inspecting his own handiwork, comments that the design is quite good. The mention of payment prompts the protagonist to ask how the funds were handled. The question catches Lucas completely off guard, a look of sudden panic on his face as he realizes he has no way to pay. The hooded youth simply states, "I borrowed it." The hooded figure clutches his chest, overwhelmed. The weight of the expectations placed upon him is immense. Lucas, observing the glowing orb of the completed intermediate formation, is stunned. He hadn't realized the hooded figure was worried he wouldn't live up to the task. In response to this pressure, he reveals a large pile of rectangular cards. He explains that this is dungeon magic, and that he has made 100 of them for Lucas to use. Lucas, now visibly flustered, picks up 2 of the cards. He notes the subtle differences in their designs, remarking on how beautiful they are. The hooded figure explains that he tried to make the font a bit more elegant. He muses that while Ko-chan was skilled at this sort of thing, he can manage a literary style himself. Still examining a card, Lucas praises the beauty of the design and the perfectly aligned corner curves. The hooded figure confirms it's a universal design, a term that leaves Lucas momentarily confused. He continues, explaining that without some harmless flair, people might become suspicious. As Lucas continues to fret in the background, the hooded figure coolly dismisses his agitation as annoying. Such a precise cut for such a minor detail is a waste, he states, but tells Lucas to use them anyway. He reaffirms that he has high hopes for him. This declaration shatters Lucas's composure. He shouts that he will not betray those expectations and demands the hooded figure watch him succeed. Despite his passionate outburst, he admits to having a bad feeling about it all. After the intense exchange, a simple offer is made, to be treated to a meal. The scene shifts to a closed-door marked VIP room outside a bustling tavern. The sounds of conversation and clinking glasses spilling out from within. Inside a grand, high-ceilinged dining hall, the hooded young man sits at a long, empty table, looking utterly overwhelmed by the opulent surroundings. Steam seems to rise from his shoulders as he stares forward, a bead of drool escaping his lips in anticipation. Before him, a waiter presents a magnificent, sizzling platter. It is a roast steak from a cliff dragon, glistening under the light and steaming invitingly. He gasps in sheer delight, exclaiming that he's actually going to eat dragon steak. The sight of it reminds him of pork, and the sound of the meat and sauce sizzling on the hot plate fills him with an almost unbearable excitement. He presses his knife into the meat, and it cuts through the tender flesh with ease. As it parts, rich juices begin to pool on the plate, and his anticipation grows. He lifts the first piece towards his mouth, his eyes wide with emotion. This was the kind of otherworldly meal he had only ever dreamed of tasting. As he prepares to take a bite, a memory surfaces. His birth as a dungeon master in a desolate cavern with nothing to eat. For 200 days, he had survived by converting his magic into energy, a process that ignored his gnawing hunger. Now, with a true meal from this world before him, he whispers a heartfelt, "Thank you for the food." He finally takes a bite. The flavor explodes in his mouth, and tears of pure ecstasy stream down his face. He is momentarily stunned into silence, a choked sound of overwhelming joy escaping his throat. He throws his head back and roars that it's unbelievably delicious. The pork-like flavor is perfectly complemented by a potent garlic sauce. He realizes that even in his modern world, he could never have found meat this exquisite. Across the table, Lucas watches with a gentle smile, observing how the tender meat releases more juice with every chew. He muses that dragon meat is truly the best. The protagonist, his face still wet with tears, turns to him and pleads, "Lucas, bring more." His request escalates into a thunderous shout for more. He suddenly addresses Lucas as Sensei. Lucas, completely taken aback, can only stammer the word back in question. The protagonist, now on his feet, declares that a single steak was nowhere near enough for a proper meal. 2 weeks had passed since the dungeon known as Hawk Hill opened, and a small, makeshift camp had formed in the surrounding fields. A young adventurer, Ars, let out a weary sigh. He recalled that at first, everyone had stayed at the hotel, but as pioneers ventured deeper, the number of campers grew while the ranks of those who gave up thinned. He clutched his head in frustration. Nearby, other adventurers chattered idly, mentioning how 3 days prior, someone's declaration that a steam bath is the best had become the final word on the matter, a triviality that only deepened his vexation. His thoughts turned to the strange man, Lucas, who had established everything from restaurants to general stores at the inn. Ars found it perplexing. Adventurers were meant to fight in dungeons, yet felt as though they were being consumed by this new economy. He admitted to himself that he knew nothing about a man like Lucas. He reasoned that a merchant that prominent should be famous, yet he had never heard the name before. Shaking the thought away, he decided it didn't matter for now. His focus shifted to a more pressing concern: what to do next. He remembered the brief period of success 4 and 5 days ago, when the first adventurers besides himself had cleared the dungeon. At that point, he knew of only 3 people, including himself, who had conquered the beginner level. The reward for that feat had been 100% pure silver, a great fortune that had brought this rush of people to the dungeon's doorstep. He recalled how the rare prize attracted many who desired it, from precious metal merchants to mages and research institutions offering to buy it. 3 silver ingots had been exchanged for 12 gold coins, which then became a staggering 1,200 silver pieces. But the story didn't end there. The real problem came next. As he pictured himself running through the dungeon's corridors, he remembered the critical change. The beginner level's difficulty had been raised, making it impossible to clear. He wondered if he needed to change his approach entirely. During his initial attempts, he had memorized the patterns, estimating around 10 different types of traps. But now, that knowledge was useless. Every attempt at a strategy failed. He had devised a new strategy. Within a 30-meter square area he had marked out, he walked with his eyes closed, forcing his body to thoroughly memorize the sense of distance. This method had proven effective. Though he'd occasionally bumped into other adventurers while practicing, he eventually succeeded on his 14th try, proudly clearing the challenge. His success was based on a simple trick. By closing his eyes, he could navigate the trap locations stored in his mind, preventing the flashing floor tiles from confusing him. However, when he challenged the beginner level again the next day, the difficulty had inexplicably risen. The rules had changed. Now, only the white and black tiles were safe, while the red ones were impassable. This change rendered his blind navigation method completely useless. Sitting outside the dungeon entrance, he considered the mounting costs of his failed attempts and admitted to himself that retreating was a real possibility. He remained there, stewing in his frustration. He had already failed over 100 times, and for 3 days, no new strategy had come to mind. It seemed only he and one other person were still attempting the challenge. As he sat, a pair of boots strode past him with a dismissive sound. The sound came from a group of adventurers walking by. The man with spiky hair remarked with surprise at seeing the wealthy Ars in such a place, calling it a hovel. Overhearing the comment, Ars looked up from his thoughts and quietly asked if they needed something. An outdoor encampment, a group of adventurers relaxes. One man, with spiky hair and a scar on his cheek, holds a mug and smirks, commenting to his companions that it's unusual to see someone as wealthy as Ars camping out in a place like this. His words reach the young adventurer, Ars, who sat alone nearby. With a weary and downcast expression, Ars looked over and asked what they wanted from him, noting that they seemed to be having a good time. The spiky-haired adventurer cheerfully explained why he was in such a good mood. He had sold the silver he acquired, turning it into 3 gold coins. He boasted that since the original was 1 silver coin, he had made a 300-fold profit. Ars's eyes widened slightly in surprise. The boy considered this information. He recalled that when he first obtained the pure silver, a single piece was valued at 12 gold coins. The price had plummeted so quickly because other adventurers had also started clearing the trial. He grimly concluded that as more supply became available, the value would continue to fall. His counterpart then changed his tone, extending an open hand. He suggested to Ars that they should cooperate, proposing they start by sharing information. He elaborated on his proposal. They could each explain how they cleared the first trial and then use that knowledge to strategize for the second. He then questioned why Ars looked so irritated, pointing out that he hadn't managed to clear the second trial yet either. Ars's mind drifted back. He remembered the many people who had approached him seeking information. He had been willing to respond, but only to those who offered something of equal value in return. Ultimately, he had never struck a deal with any of them. With his history in mind, he firmly refused the offer. He stated that there was nothing to be gained for either of them in such an arrangement, dismissing the other man's success as merely stumbling through the first clear by chance. The adventurer and his companion stared, stunned into silence. The man's friendly expression vanished, replaced by a snarl of contempt. He spat that this was exactly why people called him Stingy Ars. He angrily reminded Ars that he had initially asked other adventurers for cooperation, yet offered them nothing when they succeeded. His voice rose to a shout as he gestured wildly around the camp. He questioned why Ars, just for being a special rank adventurer, got to stand out from everyone else. He then derided all the special rank adventurers, calling them a pathetic bunch of kids. Ars remained silent, his face shadowed by the verbal assault. He remains unfazed by the threats, a slight smile playing on his lips as he calmly tells the enraged adventurer not to get carried away. In response, the man orders his companions to surround and beat Ars. He takes a moment to assess his opponents, counting 6 men in total, and notes that they seem to be on their way out. Unintimidated, he invites them to attack him all at once. His brazen challenge enrages their leader, who bellows at his men to shut Ars up and charge. The assault begins with one of the thugs hurling a bottle straight towards him. As the bottle flies, their leader shouts for the others to surround their target and prevent any escape. He effortlessly sidesteps the charging leader, who grunts in surprise as he stumbles past, his attack missing completely. Immediately after, another attacker rushes forward, only for Ars to deftly stick out a leg and send him tumbling face first into the dirt. The fallen man shouts at him not to be so smug. He stands his ground as a third man throws a powerful punch, but a glowing, circular sigil materializes from thin air, blocking the fist with a flash of light. Ars calmly observes that he might have thinned their ranks a bit too quickly. The concussive force of the impact hurls the attacker backward through the air. The spiky-haired leader and his remaining men stare in stunned disbelief, mouths agape at the unexpected display of power. In a moment of quiet contemplation, Kochan relaxes with his hands clasped behind his head, whistling a carefree tune. Beside him, the skeleton Reinal stands by, ever present. This piece is short-lived as they traverse a dark, rocky passage. Reinal, in high spirits over the new clothes he received from the boss, suggests a trip to a restaurant. Kochan, however, cuts him off, declaring that he's too tired for such grand plans. They soon enter a monitoring room where another skeleton stands guard. As Kochan wonders about the commotion, Reinal directs his attention to a large screen, urging him to see what is happening outside. His eyes widen as the screen reveals a clearing where a fierce battle is underway. He immediately recognizes one of the combatants, exclaiming to Reinal that Ars is in a fight. The view on the monitor shows the grim odds, 6 opponents surrounding a single figure. Reinal observes that even a special great adventurer would be overwhelmed by such numbers. He watches with concern, confirming the 6-to-1 odds. On the screen, Ars stands confidently amidst his foes, calmly stating that their numbers mean nothing and that their defeat is certain. In response, one of the attackers slams his fist to the ground, unleashing a spell that causes magical circles to erupt from the earth. Reinal identifies it as the intermediate magic, Iron Garden of the 3 Giants, a rare and powerful trap spell. The spectacle ignites a desire in Kochan, who excitedly proclaims that he wants to use magic too. He points out that Ars's opponent is also a magic user. Just as Ars himself begins to weave his own spell, his expression one of intense concentration. With a swift motion, Ars unleashes his power. Arcs of dark lightning burst forth, striking the area around him. Reinal confirms that this, too, is intermediate magic, Thundercloud of Twilight. Kochan, thrilled by the display, again declares his desire to perform such feats. Reinal quickly tempers his excitement, explaining that it's impossible without an aptitude for natural or spirit magic. This prompts Kochan to slump over, defeated, questioning why dungeon magic lacks any attack spells. As the battle on the monitor reached its climax, One of the adventurers facing Ars commented on his cold, lengthy silence. Observing this, Reinald turned to his boss and announced that the fight was now settled. The screen confirmed his words, showing Ars standing victorious over his defeated opponent. Kochan exclaimed in surprise at the outcome, but Reinald calmly explained that, just as he'd thought, Ars appeared to have used items to evade the attack magic. He scratched his head, impressed that a top-class adventurer like Ars could emerge from a direct lightning strike completely unharmed. Reinald smugly reminded him that he had warned him not to underestimate the adventurer, prompting Kochan to question why the skeleton was acting so proud. His thoughts then turned to Ars's next move. He figured the adventurer would probably withdraw now, a sentiment confirmed by his inner thoughts, which reasoned that Ars had been stuck in that location for several days already. He watched the image of Ars walking away, concluding that the intelligent adventurer was retreating now that there was no further profit to be made. With a determined glint in his eye, he decided it was time to open the beginner's second dungeon. This sudden declaration prompted a concerned Reinald to ask if he was truly going through with it. Kochan, looking unconcerned, wondered what the fuss was about and asked if he planned to unleash that for the second dungeon, causing Reinald's expression to darken at his boss's nonchalance. He pointed a bony finger, warning that the plan would consume an immense amount of magical power. Kochan, however, crossed his arms and dismissed the concern, stating it was fine since he had 3 million units available. With the matter settled, he clenched his fist and made the official declaration to his skeletal minions. All right then, I will now open beginner's dungeon number 2. The skeletons stood at attention, ready to carry out his will. A short while later, a single skeleton shuffled back toward him. Kochan noted its return as his small companion remarked on the unusual situation and asked what had happened. It delivered its message, a report from the demon tribe's room. Kochan processed the information for a moment before his face twisted in confusion, grabbing his chin as if trying to recall something important he had forgotten. He stares blankly as the skeleton frantically explains the situation, insisting that he help the demon child. Unimpressed, Kochan asks if he's being serious, prompting the skeleton to desperately question if he truly remembers. The memory slowly surfaces. He admits to himself that he had forgotten all about it until this very moment. Annoyed, he finally asks what the issue is with the demon child. In response, the skeleton reports that the child, who had been sleeping soundly, has just awakened. Kochan scratches his head in confusion, wondering aloud just how many days she had been asleep. The skeleton clarifies that from his perspective, it was only a brief time. However, he acknowledges that for her, it was a long slumber, and what she says is different. As the door to the room creaks open, both he and the skeleton peer inside. The supposed child is now a fully grown demon woman, stretching languidly after a rest. Kochan stares, utterly shocked, as the skeleton confirms that the demon has awakened. He recoils, covering his mouth in disbelief as the woman turns her gaze toward them. A low rumble emanates from her stomach, prompting her to wonder aloud why she feels so hungry. The dungeon master appears in the doorway. The woman, now on her feet, acknowledges her long sleep and directly addresses the robed figure, asking the old man to explain where she is. Having grown nearly 30 centimeters and fully matured during her slumber, she grabs the dungeon master in frustration. She furiously shakes the small figure, roaring that it's absurd for a sleeping child to grow so much and calling him annoying. The tall, horned woman looms over the hooded man and his skeletal companion, her expression one of intense annoyance. She declares that she is starving, her voice sharp with impatience. He stammers in surprise, calling her Asen, an informal term for an older man. She immediately corrects him, stating that the person he saved was not only a girl, but also extremely hungry. She dismisses the strange name he's given her, retorting that he's the strange one for calling an adult woman such a thing. Her frustration boils over as she begins to shout repeatedly that she is hungry. In response, the man covers his ears and yells back for her to be quiet. A short while later, the tension has subsided. Now wearing a new set of clothes, a light shirt, dark shorts, and suspenders, the woman happily devours a piece of meat. She exclaims how delicious it is, clearly relieved to finally have a proper meal. The new outfit was purchased from a general store, and the food was taken out from a local restaurant. As she eats, the hooded man sits on the floor, watching her. He notes to himself that her name is Milia and that she is already an adult, a fact that seems to surprise him. He tells her not to worry about the cost, assuring her that he will pay for it all. She pauses her meal, looking down at him with a playful smirk. She questions if he even has any money and expresses surprise that he would do such a thing for a pretty girl like her. He remains silent, contemplating her words. Milia continues, observing that his way of speaking is rough and that they are clearly of different races, making his kindness all the more puzzling. He quietly acknowledges her point. Breaking his silence, he asks if she could lower her voice just a little. She seems to understand and agrees. He then asks a more practical question. Where is her home? He suggests that her father must be worried and offers to send the money for her expenses later. Milia stops chewing, her expression turning thoughtful as she considers his question. The protagonist's patience snaps. He points an accusatory finger, his voice rising in frustration, demanding she stop talking about money. He threatens that if she continues, she'll become his slave, work to the bone in his dungeon for nothing more than food. His outburst, however, does not frighten her. Instead, Her eyes widen with curiosity as she latches onto a specific phrase. She asks if he is, perhaps, the dungeon master. Seated on the floor, he simply confirms that he is. She erupts with excitement at the confirmation, exclaiming that she's never seen a dungeon master before and declaring him to be incredibly cool. Her sudden enthusiasm leaves him completely bewildered, muttering the word cool in disbelief. Her glee continues as she marvels at the idea of him controlling the entire dungeon. As he processes her reaction, the protagonist thinks to himself that she is far too easily impressed. Nearby, the skeleton Reinl dryly observes to his boss that she is exceedingly gullible. He regains his composure, adopting a smug expression and telling her not to get too carried away. In response, she eagerly asks for a tour of the dungeon. Reinl once again remarks on her gullibility, leading her through a doorway. He reveals not a cavern of stone, but a modern command center. Skeletons sit at desks operating complex consoles under a large digital display. Milia stares, utterly baffled by the sight, while the protagonist smirks, confident in how impressive his setup is. Her bewilderment quickly turns to indignation as she points at one of the screens, demanding to know what it is. Elsewhere in the room, Reinl quietly remarks to another skeleton that their boss enjoys useless things, prompting Milia to shout that it is not useless. Reinl offers a deadpan apology for stating an objective fact. The protagonist calmly explains that the large screen displays the dungeon during active operations, allowing them to vaguely track the locations of any challengers. Milia clarifies if he means adventurers, and he confirms, adding that non-adventurers also attempt to clear. Her curiosity piqued by the mention of non-adventurers, she questions him further. He explains that even merchants clear the dungeon and suggests that showing her would be better than explaining, assuring her there is no risk to her life. As Milia tries to process this, Reinl explains that their boss's common sense is highly unconventional. This commentary earns Reinl the protagonist's ire, who points at him and declares that if he wants to get used to this place, he'd better open his mouth and accept it. He gestured towards a glowing panel on the floor, explaining that it was a teleportation device with an entrance fee of 1 silver coin. From off-panel, Milia's voice rose in protest, questioning why he would charge her when she obviously had no money. He simply stood in silence, a weary expression on his face. With a dismissive tone, he told her not to worry about the fee and to just go. A surprised Milia, with Reinl standing behind her, gave a quick affirmation and turned to leave. The moment she stepped forward, the panel flared with light. He flinched in surprise as Milia's triumphant laughter echoed, her voice mocking him for thinking she wouldn't expect to be teleported mid-sentence. A true boss-level dirty trick. Before he could fully react, she reappeared behind him, smugly declaring it an easy win and asking if that was all he had. In the background, a small, simplified version of the Dungeon Master commented to an equally small Reinl that she would eventually return. Her victory was cut short as the tiny Dungeon Master figure shouted for her weight, questioning why she was celebrating clearing the area when the trap's location was completely visible. Milia could only stare back, utterly confused. He turned to Reinl, asking if he understood the situation, but the skeleton merely shook his head. The protagonist mused that he found it strange how humans could enjoy such simple traps, admitting that he didn't understand it himself, especially since he could see the trap's location. In response, Milia confidently explained that it was simply the flow of magic, though she admitted she didn't quite understand his point. The small figures of the Dungeon Master and Reinl remained silent. Her casual dismissal made a vein throb on his temple. He internally seethed, calling her an idiot and tried to remind himself to stay calm because he was an adult. The effort failed. He grabbed her face, his composure shattering as he declared he would teach the little brat a lesson. To illustrate his point, he gestured to a diagram of an adventurer running over a grid floor. He posed a question: would a trap activate if someone passed through the air above it? And if so, how? He answered his own question, stating it was because the trap's activation range had been extended into the air. Milia, now standing beside a robed figure in the demonstration, was stunned. She couldn't believe he had created a trap without even understanding the principle behind it. He simply confirmed, "That's right." He listened, a bead of sweat on his temple, as Milia explained the principle. She pointed out that the trap's activation range possesses its own magical power. If one could perceive this flow, she continued, they could bypass the trap without needing to memorize any specific path. The realization dawned on him, his expression a mix of awe and dismay, as he muttered that this must be a special privilege unique to the demon race. Her clarification that some humans could also perform this feat sent him into a frantic spiral. His face contorted in anguish as he roared, declaring his intention to modify the traps immediately. A young adventurer in a cap rushes toward a cliff's edge, calling out in alarm. "Ars, this is terrible," he shouts to the red-haired boy standing there. He turns to face the newcomer, his expression calm. On the ground nearby lie 3 defeated adventurers. Ars dismisses the commotion, stating it wasn't a big deal and that he didn't even need to get serious. The capped adventurer, however, insists that this isn't what he's talking about. The real emergency is something else entirely. Catching his breath, the capped adventurer asks what's going on, then quickly changes the subject with urgent news. A new dungeon has just opened. The landscape before them reveals a massive, freshly formed chasm. the dungeon's gaping maw. The entrance to this new dungeon is located in a surprisingly mundane place, a brick-lined alleyway. A sign indicates the path lies through a passage situated between a restaurant and a general store. Stepping through the passage, Ars and his companion find themselves in a vast, open space. The captive adventurer expresses his shock, remarking that this wide area appeared out of nowhere. Ars quietly wonders if the space truly expanded so suddenly. They approach a notice board mounted on a brick wall. His companion notes that he didn't hear any sound when the dungeon appeared, a fact Ars confirms, finding the silence unsettling. The board lists information for Beginner Dungeon 1. His eyes scan further down the board, and his expression shifts to one of stunned realization. A new listing reads Beginner Dungeon 2. He touches his forehead, processing the information. This dungeon, like so many things around him, continues to defy all expectations. As he contemplates this, a crowd of other adventurers gathers behind them. One calls out, asking to be let through, while another loudly announces Ars's arrival. The young boy turns to face the growing audience, his demeanor unchanged. He stands silently as the crowd murmurs his name. They all seem to have the same question on their minds. Is he going to challenge this new dungeon? From the crowd emerges a large, imposing man with an eye patch, identified as Bogart, an advanced adventurer. He looks down at Ars with a smirk. "You interested too?" he asks. Ars looks up, simply replying, "Well." He asks the veteran adventurer if he has cleared the first beginner dungeon. Bogart confirms that he has, but adds that he's never heard of the second one appearing. The boy, Ars, falls silent, a thoughtful expression on his face. Bogart glances away, annoyed by the commotion from other adventurers who are buzzing about the new dungeon. He grumbles about how it appeared so suddenly, admitting he was too focused on level 2 to notice. Ars remains lost in thought. Their attention shifts to a notice posted at the entrance. It states that only Beginner Course 2 is open, with intermediate and advanced courses to follow. A crucial detail is highlighted. This dungeon poses no risk to life. Bogart finds this detail particularly concerning. Ars, meanwhile, wonders aloud if the teleportation point is the same or if it's a simultaneous transfer, admitting he doesn't know. In response, Bogart grins, revealing he has a way to find out as he presents a coin. After a moment of consideration, Ars agrees. They seal their new partnership with a firm handshake, Bogart remarking on the impressive combination of a prodigy and an advanced adventurer. As they stand together, nearby adventurers murmur in disbelief that someone is already attempting the dungeon, assuming it must be for the reward. Bogart smirks, overhearing their chatter, while Ars notes that the veteran seems to be enjoying the attention. With their decision made, Bogart steps up to the dungeon's entrance mechanism, inserting his coin into the slot to activate it. He turns to his new partner with a confident smile. "Let's go, Bogart," Ars says. The veteran grins back, axe resting on his shoulder, and gives a hearty agreement. A flash of light envelopes them. As they are transported, Ars realizes that Beginner Dungeon 2 is a misleading name. This place is nothing like the first one. They materialize in a dark, unfamiliar space, and Ars looks around in confusion, wondering where they are. He finds himself in a silent, empty void. Bogart holds out a hand, confirming there is no air current, which suggests the space is vast. He agrees with Ars's earlier suspicion. It seems they were both teleported to the same location. Suddenly, a disembodied voice echoes through the darkness, announcing the start of the Beginner Dungeon 2 guide. It reiterates that there is no risk of death. Any harm from monsters or traps will result in immediate ejection via teleportation. Bogart is visibly startled by the announcement, while Ars processes the unexpected mention of monsters. He listened as the disembodied voice continued its explanation, clarifying that this was unlike a normal dungeon. If challenged as a team, all members would be bound by joint responsibility. Should even one member fail, the entire party would be considered defeated and ejected from the premises. The voice added that the only traversable route was the one currently illuminated. Furthermore, monsters could not be bypassed. They had to be eliminated using any available method of attack. Bogart grinned, finding these straightforward rules much to his liking. As they stepped into the light, the dungeon conquest would officially begin, with a reward set at a single gold coin. Ars considered this, concluding that the prize was hardly worth the effort. For now, he decided they would simply clear it and be done. However, there was a catch. The voice elaborated. If no one managed to clear the dungeon on a given day, the gold coin reward would be carried over to the next. This accumulation would continue until a victor finally emerged. The unexpected rule caught Ars completely by surprise. He demanded to know what that meant. The voice provided an example. If 10 days passed without a clear, the reward would accumulate to 10 gold coins. If that period extended to 100 days, the prize would become 100 gold coins. Following this explanation, the voice announced the current reward, 1 gold coin. Bogart erupted in disbelief, utterly shocked by the paltry sum. His outburst faded into silence as they stood in the darkness before the entrance. Bogart turned to Ars, asking for his opinion. Ars reasoned that the best strategy would be to wait 10 days after the last challenger failed. Making a direct attempt now seemed pointless. Bogart agreed, acknowledging that desperate adventurers would still go for the single gold coin. He mused that while earning 1 gold coin daily was appealing, he suspected the dungeon's difficulty would increase after the first successful clear. Ars shared his sentiment, suggesting they should at least try it. He figured that if a party of 5 could handle the monsters with ease, the 2 of them could certainly triumph. However, he remained wary of one thing: the joint responsibility clause. With their minds made up, he gave the word to proceed. They stepped forward into a vast, sprawling cavern, revealing a narrow, winding path suspended over chasm. Bogart stared out at the immense space, remarking on its sheer scale. Standing at the edge of a vast, dark chasm, the adventurer Bogart observes its immense scale. He remarks to his young companion, Ars, that the expanse must be at least a kilometer wide. As they contemplate the chasm, 3 hulking figures shamble out of the darkness. Ars identifies them as golems, noting that they are magical monsters, constructs of rock and earth animated by pure strength, unlike other creatures that possess a life force. He turns to Bogart, asking if they should simply smash their way through. Bogart agrees, though he mentions that taking the route to the right would allow them to bypass the creatures entirely. With the decision made, Bogart charges forward, axe held high. As the large warrior closes the distance, Ars's eyes widen, noticing something unusual on the golem's hand. His gaze sharpens on the creature's palm, revealing an inscribed character. Ars recognizes it with a jolt. It's the symbol for transfer. Realizing the trap, he screams a warning to Bogart to be careful, explaining that a single touch from that hand will teleport him away. The golem's arm swings with unexpected speed, forcing Bogart to twist his body desperately to evade the attack. As the massive stone fist whistles past, Ars shouts his companion's name in alarm. Bogart lets out a guttural roar from the exertion. The golem's attack misses, its fist smashing into the stone floor with tremendous force, kicking up dust and debris. Having successfully dodged the blow, Bogart pivots and brings his axe around in a powerful counterswing, striking the golem's stony flank. He spits to the side, annoyed. The golem, he mutters, made him rush. Behind him, Ars watches the scene unfold, catching his breath after the sudden burst of action. As his companion charged the golems, Ars assessed the battlefield. The path was narrow, and with 2 other constructs still active, he knew getting any closer would be unwise. Realizing this, he decided on a course of action, raising his hand to conjure a glowing, intricate sigil of light. He launched the magical disc forward, which streaked through the air and slammed into one of the advancing golems, shattering on impact. The spell was effective. Ars concluded that using magic was the best way to proceed, a sentiment Bogart seemed to share as he watched from the front line. Ars called out his plan. He would draw the golem's attention with his magic, taking them down one by one. Bogart roared his approval, turning to face the remaining constructs and bellowing for them to face him. The battle became a coordinated effort. As Bogart engaged 2 golems with his heavy axe, Ars provided support from a distance, launching another disc of light. The warrior deftly dodged a clumsy attack and brought his weapon down with immense force. Bogart shouted that one was down. Encouraged, Ars affirmed they would press their advantage. He then unleashed a rapid volley of magical discs. The projectiles exploded against the ground, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris that engulfed the remaining golems. His vision obscured by the sudden dust storm, Bogart clicked his tongue in annoyance, realizing the golems had moved deeper into the haze. As the dust began to settle, Ars found himself face to face with the final golem. It was far too close. He realized with a start that at this range, he would be caught in his own magical blast. He quickly understood that his sword was ill-suited for battling a golem. As the stone creature swung its massive arm, he leaped back to avoid the blow. Just as he landed, Bogart charged in, confirming that it was indeed a monster. With a mighty swing, the veteran adventurer brought his weapon down, shattering the golem's head in a single, decisive strike. He turned to Ars, giving a thumbs up in approval. He praised the boy, telling him it was a good lure. As they spoke, Bogart remarked that Ars must have known he was timing his attack. Unseen by them, a small, rocky creature cautiously peeked out from behind the golem's remains. The creature then stepped out into the open, startling Ars with its appearance. Bogart, however, seemed unfazed, simply telling the tiny golem to proceed. It waddled closer to Ars's feet and raised one of its stony hands. Inscribed on its palm was the very same transfer rune from the larger golems. The sight left Ars utterly stunned. The tiny creature let out a small, quiet sound.